Chapter 874. After saying that, Wang Jinyuan immediately stabbed Lu Ye's back with the Yellow River's 9 bends ruler. Lu Ye's body trembled, as if he couldn't believe that Wang Jinyuan would betray him at this time. He turned his head abruptly and said, "Let's go." "You almost there?" Wang Jinyuan sneered and said. "A wise man submits to circumstances, sect leader Lu. Don't tell me you haven't heard of this saying?" Lu Ye's chest was pierced by the Yellow River's 9 bends ruler. His whole body trembled violently. He wanted to angrily scold Wang Jinyuan for being despicable and insidious, but as soon as he opened his mouth, he spat out a mouthful of blood. Wang Jinyuan looked at him with great pleasure and said with a ferocious face, "Sect leader Lu, didn't you predict everything? How about it? How many of today's events can you predict correctly? Humph, I've long had enough of you ordering me around and ordering me around. Today, I'll let you know my prowess." Lu Yi trembled all over and finally couldn't help but roar, "Yum." Before he could finish his words, the Yellow River's 9 bends ruler in Wang Jinyuan's hand twisted hard and scattered all of Lu Ye's qi. He snorted coldly and a sharp sword appeared in his hand like lightning. With a swoosh, a cold light swept across Lu Ye's neck. With a puff, Lu Ye's head flew into the sky, and the blood in his neck spurted 3 feet high, like a rain of blood. The Yellow River's 9 bends ruler in Wang Jinyuan's hand instantly absorbed all the yang spirit qi in Lu Ye's body. He was covered in blood, but he couldn't hide the proud smile on his face. At this time, Purin and the others also came forward to greet Li Yundong. After a big battle, Purin seemed to have aged more than 10 years, and he was very tired. But although he was tired, his face was still full of smiles. He said to Li Yundong with joy, "Zhenren Li, although I didn't manage to get all the results in today's battle, I finally caught the soul of the mystical silver fox. I wonder if I can ask, how will Zhenren Li deal with the aftermath of this matter?" The mystical silver fox escaped into the purple-gold luopan like lightning. Li Yundong also felt that it was very tricky, but he didn't want others to know this. Otherwise, it would give others an excuse and reason to interfere in this matter. Once these people got their hands on her, they would definitely not care about Xueqi's safety. Compared with the casualties and losses that the mystical silver fox had brought to the world, Xueqi's life was nothing. Li Yundong could be impolite to the cultivators of the Japanese cultivation world, but he could not be impolite to the eminent monk who had helped him. He respectfully returned the salute and said, "Master Purin, don't worry. I will definitely find a way to stop the mystical silver fox from doing evil again." Li Yundong's words were very cunning. He did not say that he had to kill the mystical silver fox, nor did he say how he would deal with the aftermath of this matter. Although Purin was old, he was not confused. His heart was as clear as a mirror. He looked at Li Yundong meaningfully and smiled slightly. Although the mystical silver fox has been captured, the evil has not been eradicated. "Zhenren Li, you won't forget this, will you?" At this time, Li Yundong was suddenly shocked and blurted out, "Lu Yi. Did he run away again?" As soon as Li Yundong finished speaking, he saw a man flying up from the ground. He was covered in blood and holding a head. He shouted in mid-air, "The evil Lu Yi has been killed." It was Wang Jinyuan. Everyone took a closer look and saw that the head in Wang Jinyuan's hand was indeed Lu Yi. They were all shocked and burst into an uproar. Some vigilant cultivators shouted, "Wang Jinyuan, what the hell do you want to do? Do you want to betray us at the last minute?" However, Wang Jinyuan's face was full of righteousness. He said loudly, "Everyone, listen to me. After I finish, if you want to kill me, I will not resist or stop you." As he spoke, he shouted at Li Yundong, "Zhenren Li, you won't even let me say a word of rebuttal, will you?" At this time, Li Yundong sneered and said, "Master Wan, your mouth is yours. Of course, it's your freedom to say whatever you want." This sentence was full of deep meaning and hidden sarcasm. The subtext was, "The mouth is on you. No matter what you say, it's only your side of the story. But the ears are on us. Whether we listen or not, it's all on us." You almost there? Wang Jinyuan was a cunning man, so how could he not understand? However, he pretended not to understand and said loudly, "Everyone, I believe that everyone has heard about Yan Feng of the Linggong sect of the Zhengyi school lurking for 9 years in order to eradicate the Fox Zen school. But in reality, she's not the only one in hiding. There's also me." His words made the crowd hiss. Most of them didn't believe him. However, Wang Jinyuan was not discouraged. He said loudly, "I know you don't believe me, but think about it. I, Wang Jinyuan, didn't enjoy the glory, splendor, wealth, and the ready-made way of Jindan. Why would I take the risk of doing something like this with Lu Yi? At that time, I saw that Lu Ye's plan was too big, but he was too strong. If I told him in advance, maybe he would think of another way. At that time, it would be even more difficult to guard against him. That's why I thought of pretending to be a snake and making a compromise, so that I could immediately do my best and capture all these demons and ghosts in one go." The more he spoke, the more excited he became. "Everyone, think about it. I am the master of external alchemy. Why should I take the risk and ruin my reputation today? My Gazao sect has been passed down for nearly 1,000 years, and it is one of the 3 mountains of Taoism. In terms of status, it is not lower than that of Mount Longhu Zhengyi School. Why should I join in the evil, abandon myself, and be with an evil man? Am I born to be degenerate and obscene?" As he spoke, he raised Lu Ye's head high and said loudly, "Now, the evil culprit is here. If you don't believe me, just come up and make a move. I will never fight back. But before you make a move, please look at the evil culprit's eyes before you make a move." At this time, some people with sharp eyes looked at the eyes on Lu Ye's head, only to see Lu Yi glaring at them, as if he had died with a grievance. Obviously, he was extremely angry. Suddenly, many people murmured in their hearts and whispered, "Could it be that Master Wan really compromised and was just putting on a show before?" However, there were also people who knew what was going on and asked loudly, "Master Wan, since you compromised, why didn't you help us at the most critical moment just now? Instead, you helped Lu Yi and the mystical silver fox?" This was the most critical and core of all the problems. Wang Jinyuan was already prepared. He said with a pained expression, "I have no choice but to fight against you. My heart hurts like a knife. But think about it, did I hurt any of you before? As for why I didn't help you, think about it. Lu Yi and the mystical silver fox, one is an 8-tailed earth fox, and the other is a 9-tailed celestial fox. If I expose myself and go against them, can I save one more person? If I don't expose myself, in case my plan fails, I can still save as much of the fire of the cultivation sect as possible. My painstaking efforts can be proved by heaven." Wang Jinyuan's words were really flawless. If Li Yunyang hadn't known that Lu Yi had helped Wang Jinyuan find the Renyuan Jindan and the Diyuan Jindan, he would have believed his words. However, many cultivators present did not know about this matter. At this time, hearing Wang Jinyuan's words, many people were seriously shaken. Especially when they saw Wang Jinyuan's righteous face, they believed him a little more. Although Su Chan was somewhat disgusted and dissatisfied with Lu Yi, they were of the same kind after all. Seeing that the former leader of the Fox Zen school had died so miserably, she couldn't help but close her eyes and turn her head, not daring to look again. Xueqi said in a low voice, "Master, do you think this is true? Why do I feel that Wang Jinyuan is speculating? In my opinion, he betrayed us at the last minute. When he saw that things had failed, he killed Lu Yi to claim credit and clear his name." Li Yunyang stared at Wang Jinyuan and snorted coldly without saying anything. Zi Yuan, who was beside him, winked at Xueqi and said in a low voice, "Xueqi, don't make wild guesses." Xueqi wanted to say more, but she saw Zi Yuan glance at Purin. Only then did she understand and swallow her words. She could say these words without worrying about taking any responsibility, but Li Yunyang couldn't. He was now the leader of the Fox Zen school. Not only was his identity sensitive, but Wang Jinyuan was also the leader of the external alchemy in the Chinese cultivation world. He had a respected status, so anyone could easily blame him. At this time, Li Yunyang turned to Purin and said, "Master Purin, what do you think?" Purin smiled slightly, put his palms together, and said, "Amitba, when the false is true, the true is false, and when the true is false, the false is true. The true only exists in people's hearts, and the false only exists in lies and rumors. One day the truth will come to light." Li Yunyang suddenly smiled bitterly in his heart. Buddhist cultivators love to talk about Zen. Their words seemed to be full of profound meaning, but in fact, they didn't say anything. They were extremely tactful and didn't want to offend anyone. He glanced around and saw that most of the Chinese cultivators had already believed Wang Jinyuan's words. Most importantly, he was now holding Lu Ye's head in his hand, which had already shut everyone's mouths. Moreover, His strength was not weak, and he was the leader of the external alchemy with great financial resources. If they really went to cause trouble for him, the consequences would be a little serious. The Chinese cultivation world was now seriously injured. If they fought among themselves in front of these Japanese, it would be really shameful. Seeing this, Li Yunyang smiled slightly and said to Wang Jinyuan meaningfully, "Master Wan, you are so eloquent. I admire you." Wang Jinyuan didn't seem to understand his sarcasm. He also smiled slightly and said, "Zhenren Li, you have a good method. I also admire you very much." The two of them looked at each other and smiled. Both of them laughed mischievously. Li Yunyang saw that Wang Jinyuan finally flew to the top of the mountain where the cultivators of the Chinese cultivation world were gathered. He saluted them one by one and showed them the weapons in his hand. He couldn't help thinking to himself, Lu Yi, this old fox, has been hiding for 9 years and set up such a big trap. On that day, he escaped by faking his death and used me as a tool. How could such a cunning and scheming person not expect that Wang Jinyuan would change sides? No way. Thinking of this, Li Yunyang's heart skipped a beat. His young spirit quickly flew to the foot of the mountain. He followed the smell of blood all the way and found the place where Wang Jinyuan had killed Lu Yi. He found a large area of blood, but Lu Ye's headless body had disappeared. Li Yunyang couldn't help but be shocked. He thought to himself, "Where is Lu Ye's body? Could it be that I flew away?" Logically speaking, if Wang Jinyuan had really changed sides, it was impossible for him not to destroy Lu Ye's body and soul. But if Lu Yi was really on guard, it was impossible for him to not have a backup plan. However, looking at the situation in front of him, he really couldn't decide whether Lu Yi would live or die. Li Yunyang looked at the large pool of blood on the ground and couldn't help but become gloomy. Lu Yi, this old fox, is he dead? Chapter 875. Li Yundong checked the place for a long time, but he couldn't find any clues. Soon, at this moment, an unprecedented and fierce battle finally came to an end. This fierce battle was marked by the appearance of the mystical silver fox. It officially began. In the process, the mystical silver fox arrogantly and conceitedly gave the Japanese cultivation world 2 chances. Finally, they waited for the Chinese cultivators to come to help twice. In the end, Li Yundong arrived in time with Su Chan, Zi Yuan, and Zhou Qin at the critical moment and successfully defeated the mystical silver fox. The fight was long and hard, but it ended abruptly like a fight between 2 exhausted boxers, which ended abruptly with the collapse of one of them. But it seemed to be over, but in fact, it made people feel a little uneasy. Li Yundong was worried about Lu Ye's whereabouts. He felt that Lu Ye's life and death seemed to be uncertain, and his whereabouts were unknown. The cultivators of the various sects in China were worried about the whereabouts of the mystical silver fox. Although they all came up to greet Li Yundong politely, their eyes kept sweeping over the purple gold luo pan in Zi Yuan's hand. They wished they could snatch the powerful magical weapon and destroy it immediately. Li Yundong knew what they were thinking, but he pretended not to know. When someone mentioned it to him in a roundabout way, he also pretended to be deaf and dumb. When others saw him pretending to be stupid, they were worried in their hearts, but there was nothing they could do. First, it was because Li Yundong's strength had reached the peak of the Chinese cultivation world. Wang Yuanshan was dead, and Zhou Chong had ascended to immortality. At this time, the title of the best in the world would probably officially fall on Li Wudi's head. Secondly, Li Yundong had made great contributions in the battle to encircle and suppress the mystical silver fox. It could be said that without him, the mystical silver fox would sweep away all the cultivators without any suspense. The Japanese cultivation world was also well aware of this. They were extremely respectful to Li Yundong. At this time, no one doubted Li Yundong's identity as the reincarnated Wisdom King. Even the Tiantai sect, the Pure Land True sect, and the Zhenyan Tantrism, who had many conflicts with Li Yundong, rushed over from the top of the mountain and saluted the reincarnated Wisdom King. At this time, Li Jiandong had no time to think about how to deal with the mystical silver fox hiding in the purple gold luo pan. He had to greet the cultivators who came to see him like a busy foreigner. Zi Yuan acted as his interpreter, and the two of them were very busy. Soon Dingnan looked at Li Yundong enviously. She had always been very vain and had always longed to be the focus of everyone's attention. Li Yundong didn't like to stay in the public eye, nor did he like to be pursued by everyone, but she was very yearning for it. She only hoped that if she were in Li Yundong's position, how good would that be? Ding Nan bit her lips gently, and there was no resentment in her heart. She thought that she had contributed a lot in this fierce battle, but no one had come up to affirm her achievements and contributions. What she had done had been covered up by Li Yundong. If this goes on, when will the world notice me? Ding Nan thought faintly in her heart, and her eyes fell on Li Yundong. Xueqi, who was standing to one side, saw that her eyes were full of unwillingness and resentment. She couldn't help but think of the friction and resentment between her and Ding Nan before. She thought that Ding Nan was thinking about the immortal pen that Li Yundong had not returned yet, so she secretly felt resentful in her heart. She said, "Why are you looking at my master like that? Are you afraid that he won't return your powerful magical weapon? Oh, by the way, even you know that this powerful magical weapon is not yours, so why are you still thinking about it?" Ding Nan's heart was already full of resentment. At this time, when she heard this, it was like adding oil to the fire. She immediately turned her head and glared at Xueqi. Xueqi didn't stand on ceremony. She sneered and said, "Don't worry. Although this powerful magical weapon is not yours, my master won't take advantage of you. If he says that he will return it to you, he will definitely return it to you." Ding Nan couldn't stand it anymore, so she immediately blurted out, "Am I worried? I don't think Li Yundong would do such a thing." With that, she turned around and left, as if she couldn't bear to stay with Xueqi any longer. But after a few steps, she immediately regretted it. The immortal pen was not an ordinary powerful magical weapon. With such a powerful magical weapon, it was equivalent to having many more trump cards in the battle. Ding Nan couldn't help looking back at Li Yundong, only to see that her familiar classmate and the object of her love was smiling and greeting the cultivators of various sects in Japan, as if he was a foreigner. Among them, many people from the Chinese cultivation sects also came over to greet him. Du Fei of the Chuanjian Dragon sect, relying on his good relationship with Li Yundong, stepped forward and cupped his hands, saying with a smile, "Zhenrenli has shown great power today. I, Du Fei, am really impressed. It's really lucky that the Chinese cultivation world has a great cultivator like Zhenrenli." Li Yundong chuckled, turned around, took the burning thumb pot, and handed it to Du Fei with both hands. He said, "It's all thanks to Zhenrendu's help. You lent me this powerful magical weapon, and with the help of all the cultivators, who didn't care about life and death, we were able to win the battle. This is really not my own credit. Zhenrendu, take back this burning thumb pot. I've been shameless enough to borrow it for many days, and it's time to return it to you." The burning thumb pot was a Buddhist magic weapon. Du Fei was holding it like an antique collection. He couldn't use it at all. There was no cultivator in the Dragon Gate sect of the Chuanjian sect who could use this magic weapon. When Du Fei saw that Li Yundong had pointed out this point, he felt very proud. He secretly admired Li Yundong for being so young and so powerful. His words were also so beautiful. He could be said to have taken care of everything. Du Fei was not only a cultivator, but also a shrewd businessman. How could he accept it at this time? He just laughed and said, as the saying goes, a treasure sword is given to a hero. Although this burning thumb pot is not a treasure sword, it is also a famous powerful magical weapon of Buddhism. Since Zhenrenli is the reincarnation of Wisdom King, it's a good match for you to hold this powerful magical weapon. Otherwise, if we Taoist cultivators hold this powerful magical weapon of Buddhism and stare at it helplessly, it would be a waste. At this time, he had generously given the burning thumb pot away in public. On the one hand, it confirmed the contribution and assistance of the Chuanjian Dragon Gate sect in this fierce battle. On the other hand, it made everyone sigh in admiration in their hearts. Zhenrendu is so generous. This is the personal powerful magical weapon of Monk Fahai. He actually gave it away just like that. Good spirit, good means. Different people had different feelings when they saw the same thing. Some cultivators who coveted the burning thumb pot only felt that Du Fei was generous, while scheming cultivators like Wang Yuan felt that Du Fei was really good at seizing the opportunity. He had given away a powerful magical weapon that seemed powerful but was useless to them, but he had gotten a great bargain. He had not only established the credit of the Chuanjian Dragon Gate sect in this battle, but also made up for Li Yundong's life-saving grace. It was really a very cost-effective deal. He deserved to be called the most profitable cultivator in the cultivation world. However, in Ding Nan's eyes, she saw that Li Yundong was honest and trustworthy. He had explained the origin of the burning thumb pot in public and said that he would return it. Such a gentleman's behavior made her feel very relieved. She was no longer worried that Li Yundong would swallow her powerful magical weapon. After Ding Nan was relieved, she turned around and came to the disciples of Mount Wuhua, who were waiting for her on the mountain. At this time, Song Guohua and the others were waiting for her to return. When they saw her figure, they suddenly seemed to have a backbone. Although Ding Nan had been chased by the mystical silver fox several times before, no one among the cultivators of the various sects in the Middle Sun dared to look at her. Even many cultivators who had looked at them with contempt and disdain before did not dare to look at them at this time. Although the strength that Ding Nan had shown in this battle was not eye-catching, the potential that she had shown and the role that she had played in this battle were very important. It could even be said that she had become the last feather that had crushed the mystical silver fox with the luck of heaven. When Song Guohua and the others saw Ding Nan's return, all of them beamed with joy and complacency, and they even couldn't help but once again loudly shout the slogan they were used to shouting. Sect leader of 5-point sect, supernatural power surpasses the gods, I am the only one in the world. Usually, Ding Nan didn't feel anything when she heard this slogan, but today, when she heard it, she felt her face burning. She knew that the gap between her and Li Yundong was too big, not to mention Zhou Chong, Wang Yuanshan, and the others. She really didn't have the face to listen to these words of, I'm the only one in the world. Ding Nan glared at Song Guohua and the others and shouted in a low voice, Don't mention these words again. Song Guohua rolled his eyes and said with a smile, Yes, I won't mention it now. In the future, when the leader's spiritual power is really divine, it won't be too late to mention it. Ding Nan snorted and glanced not far away. She saw Mao Yichang and the others looking at her strangely. She sneered to herself, then turned around and left arrogantly. Song Guohua followed closely behind her, as well as Alba and the others, who were already dumbfounded by what they saw. At this time, when Zhang Tianhe and Zhou Ping rushed to Xueqi, they only caught up with the end of the battle. They saw that Li Yundong had subdued the mystical silver fox and sealed it in the purple-gold luo disc. They couldn't help but look at each other. After Zhang Tianhe went forward to greet Li Yundong and congratulate him, he turned to Zhou Ping and said, Eldest Shiji, we have to go back quickly and tell the leader and auntie the news first. When Zhang Tianhe and Li Yundong greeted him, Li Yundong solemnly told him to go back quickly and restrain the disciples of the Xueqi school. Don't do anything offensive to Ao Wushuang. After he returned, he would go to the Xueqi school to explain the situation as soon as possible. After Zhang Tianhe agreed, he hurried back to Mount Longhu with Zhou Ping, regardless of how dusty the journey was. When they returned to Mount Longhu, Zhang Ling and the others of the Xueqi school had already received the news. After all, no matter how fast they flew these days, it was not as fast as the mobile phone message. They gathered at the gate of Mount Longhu to welcome Zhang Tianhe and the others. At this time, Zhang Lufang and the others had also heard the news that the mystical silver fox had been subdued. They cheered in the crowd like a noisy little sparrow. Her eyes were sharp, and she saw Zhang Tianhe and Zhou Ping flying over from afar. She immediately pointed them out and said, Ah, senior brother Tianhe and senior sister are back. When the crowd saw them, they immediately cheered, especially the disciples who had been guarding the absolute love destroyer formation. They were all very glad. They didn't dare to imagine what would happen if the mystical silver fox won. If they implicated the Xueqi school, their sins would really be irredeemable. After Zhang Tianhe and Zhou Ping landed, they were welcomed by the people of the Xueqi school with the courtesy of heroes. Many people immediately surrounded them and asked about the situation of the fierce battle. Zhang Tianhe didn't care to enjoy such treatment, so he passed on Li Yundong's words to Zhang Ling. After hearing Zhang Tianhe's words, Zhang Ling knew that the reason why the mystical silver fox could be subdued was that Li Yundong had contributed a lot. His request at this time sounded reasonable, but how to deal with it was a big problem for the Xueqi school. If they listened to him, where would the face of the Xueqi school be? After all, it was a fact that Ao Wushuang had attacked the forbidden area and tried to destroy the magic formation. If they let her go like this, then all the cats and dogs would come to attack the Xueqi school in the future. But if they didn't listen to him, the Xueqi school would owe him such a big favor, but it would be unreasonable. They didn't know how the cultivators in Jianghu would gossip about them behind their backs. Zhang Ling was in a dilemma. After a little hesitation, she had an idea. She raised her head and said, Gather all the disciples of the Xueqi school. I want to review this matter. I must find out the truth. Chapter 876. Zhang Ling's words stunned Zhou Ping. She said to Zhang Ling in a low voice, "Master, does this matter still need to be retried? Isn't it obvious at a glance? What can be the result of a retrial? What if Li Yundong is not satisfied?" Zhang Ling glanced at her and said in a deep voice, "How do you know if you don't interrogate him? Now that I think about it carefully, it is indeed a little strange. I heard from Tianhe that Ao Wushuang had been captured before she rushed into the stone cave, but why did the magic formation still collapse and destroy it? You'll be there soon. As the saying goes, times have changed. If Li Yundong hadn't defeated the mystical silver fox before, Zhang Ling wouldn't have cared whether she had wronged Ao Wushuang or not. But now things were different, so of course, she couldn't blindly smooth things over. Zhang Ling looked at Zhang Tianhe worriedly. She was afraid that the investigation would eventually lead to him and bring him trouble. However, if she didn't investigate, she wouldn't be able to do anything about it. Zhang Tianhe saw Zhang Ling's gaze and knew that she was worried. He smiled and said, "Uncle Master, please find out the truth. If I'm really at fault and guilty, I won't shirk it, and I don't want anyone to shirk it for me." Zhang Ling nodded in her heart and praised him, but her face was expressionless. She turned around and said, "What are you waiting for? Let's go back to the Taoist master's mansion." At this time, everyone followed Zhang Ling and returned to the mountainside of the main peak. A Taoist priest on duty rang the bell, but it was the copper bell that would summon all the disciples when they were doing homework or had important things to announce. For a moment, the bell rang on the main peak of Mount Longhu. After a while, the disciples of the Zhangyi sect from all the peaks arrived one after another. Zhang Ling asked some of the disciples to close the Taoist master's mansion outside, while she prepared to hold a meeting with many disciples in the inner hall to investigate the case. Zhang Ling sat under the statue of Zhang Tianshi with a dignified face. She glanced at the crowd coldly and asked a middle-aged man, "How is Ao Wushuang now?" The middle-aged man bowed and said, "She's still in custody." Zhang Ling asked, "Is she all right?" The middle-aged man said, "No, except for a bit of dementia, everything else is fine." Zhang Ling was silent for a while. She knew that Ao Wushuang must be looking forward to Wang Yuanshan's return, but Wang Yuanshan had already been crushed by the 9-heaven divine night thunder. If he could come back, not only would Ao Wushuang be happy, but she would also be happy. After all, although the Linggong sect and the Zhangyi school had some conflicts because of some interests, they were of the same origin. If Wang Yuanshan was still alive, the strength of the Zhangyi school would be greatly enhanced. After a moment of silence, Zhang Ling nodded her head and said to Zhang Tianhe, "Tianhe, tell everyone here about what happened that day." Zhang Tianhe responded. He was handsome, had an outstanding temperament, and was quite eloquent. After bowing to the crowd, he quickly explained what had happened. For a time, after everyone heard this, they all raised their heads and whispered to each other. The huge inner hall of the Celestial Master Mansion was full of discussions. Zhang Lufang was also in the crowd at this time. She couldn't help but be stunned and whispered, "Oh no, Xixiang Tianhe won't be punished for this, will he?" Li Sen was also a disciple of the Zhangyi school, so he was also present. He looked around curiously. Although he had a certain foundation in Chinese, he couldn't understand everything. At this time, he was still a little confused and asked in a low voice, "Xixiang, what happened?" Zhang Lufang was not in the mood to pay attention to him. She waved at him and said, "Don't quarrel. Listen to Xixiang Tianhe." After Zhang Tianhe finished speaking, Zhang Ling and the others saw that Zhang Tianhe was taking all the responsibility on his shoulders. The more they listened, the darker their faces became. Zhang Ling shook her head secretly and couldn't help but say, "Tianhe, think about it carefully. Apart from Ao Wushuang, who else entered the magic formation at that time?" Zhang Tianhe thought for a moment and suddenly thought of something. He couldn't help glancing at Zhang Lufang. At this time, Zhang Lufang also seemed to have thought of something, and her heart suddenly shook. "Oh, it can't be that I'm also involved in this matter, right?" At this time, her face was full of horror. Zhang Tianhe, who was in the field, saw it, but he quickly looked away and said in a clear voice, "There were no outsiders in or out." His answer was a little cunning. Zhang Lufang and Li Sen were both disciples of the Zhangyi school, so they naturally could not be regarded as outsiders. Zhang Ling and the others were used to thinking that the internal disciples of the Zhangyi school would not be crazy enough to destroy the magic formation. Even if they wanted to, they didn't have the ability to do so they didn't think too much about it. Zhang Ling thought to herself. Seeing that she couldn't get any more information, she said, Tianhe, you guys come with me to the location of the magic formation to have a look. As she spoke, she walked out of the hall with several senior cultivators of the Xueqi school and headed for the side peak. The group of people arrived at the back of the side peak. At this time, half of the peak had collapsed, and the stone cave was almost buried. Zhang Ling frowned, turned around and shouted, dig up the stone cave. I want to see what's going on with the magic formation. Digging up such a large stone cave was no less than a huge project. It was common for ordinary people to dig for a few months. You soon. For a moment, many disciples of the Xueqi school stepped forward. Some used powerful magical weapons, some used the 5 ghosts moving skill, and some relied on their superior strength to move the boulders away one by one. Hundreds of cultivators worked together and quickly dug up the collapsed mountain. Zhang Ling and the others walked inside. Because they were afraid that the mountain would collapse again, many cultivators used their spiritual power and powerful magical weapons to maintain the mountain to prevent it from collapsing. Zhang Ling and the others walked into the excavated stone cave and saw that it was already a mess. This explosion was like an atomic bomb. How could they find any clues? Zhang Ling finally shook her head and sighed. What should we do? Why is this place like this? The elders of the Xueqi school also looked worried. Someone immediately said, Eldest Xueqi, why don't we punish them 50 times each? Zhang Ling thought for a while and felt that there was no better way than this. It was impossible not to blame Ao Wushuang at all. The Xueqi school would lose face, so they could symbolically punish Zhang Tianhe. However, they could also give Li Yundong a place to rest. Zhang Ling nodded and walked out of the cave. She came to the field, took a deep breath and said, the magic formation has been destroyed, and we can't find any clues. As soon as she said this, everyone immediately raised their heads and whispered to each other. Zhang Lufang heard her Xixiang and Shimi whispering, Hey, Xixiang, who do you think destroyed this magic formation? Could it be Ao Wushuang? Ha, Ao Wushuang? If she still has the Bahuang sword, it's possible. It's impossible for ordinary powerful magical weapons and ordinary cultivators to destroy this magic formation. Only the magic weapon of the present age can destroy it. When she came here, she was unarmed. How could she destroy the magic formation? Hey, that's strange. Who could it be? When Zhang Lufang heard this, she couldn't help but be stunned. She thought to herself, only the magic weapon of that time could destroy the magic formation? Her face suddenly changed, and she finally thought of something. Her pretty face suddenly turned pale and her heart thumped. Oh my God! It was Big Blockhead who destroyed the magic formation. What should I do? It could be said that Zhang Lufang had been raised in the palm of people's hands since she was a child, and she had never encountered any emergencies. At this time, when she suddenly encountered such a thing, she didn't know how to hide it. All her thoughts were written on her face, and Li Sen could see it clearly. Li Sen knew that it was not easy for a foreigner to seek the Tao and cultivate in a foreign country, so he often felt lonely. He followed his Xueqi, the only person he was familiar with. Therefore, wherever he went, his eyes were fixed on Zhang Lufang. At this time, seeing Zhang Liufang's anxious look, he couldn't help but ask, Xueqi, what's wrong with you? Are you not feeling well? Zhang Liufang's body trembled violently. She turned her face in fear, pulled Li Sen's hand, and pulled him out of the crowd. She whispered in a trembling voice, Big Blockhead, you're dead, and I'm dead too. Li Sen had never seen Zhang Lufang so scared. He was shocked and became nervous. What's wrong? Zhang Lufang said in a trembling voice, Idiot, do you remember that you fell in the stone cave before? Li Sen thought she was talking about something serious, but when he heard it, he immediately smiled and said, I didn't fall. I used the 7-star sword in time to support myself. Xixiang, don't worry, I'm fine. You don't have to worry about me. As he said this, he even jumped a few times to show that he was fine. Zhang Lufang saw that his voice was quite loud and attracted many people's attention. She was so angry that she wanted to kick him a few times. Will it kill you to speak in a low voice? Shut up. Li Sen immediately shut his mouth tightly, looking nervous. He said softly, Xixiang, I'm really fine. Zhang Lufang was so angry that she glared at him. Fine my ass. You idiot. Don't you know that you've caused a huge disaster when you fell down in the mountain cave? When you used the 7-star sword to support yourself on the ground, you probably destroyed the magic formation. It's over. It's over. I shouldn't have brought you to this cave in the first place. Alas, I'm so meddlesome. Why did I cause such a disaster? Zhang Lufeng blamed herself, and Li Sen's eyes widened. Magic formation? What magic formation? What is a magic formation? Zhang Lufeng was tongue-tied. She wanted to explain to him, but she didn't know where to start. She sighed and said, "Anyway, you know that you're dead, and I'm dead too. That's enough." Li Sen looked at her anxiously. "Is it very serious?" Zhang Lufeng nodded hard and said word by word, "Very, very serious." Li Sen couldn't help but shout, "Oh my God, no way. I won't be fired, will I?" Zhang Lufeng said with a sad face, "If only it were that simple." Li Sen looked at Zhang Lufeng with a sad face and said, "Xueqi, you have to save me." Zhang Lufeng glanced at him. Although she hated him for falling for no reason and causing such a big disaster, she also knew that she couldn't escape from this matter. She knew that if something happened, she was afraid that she would be locked up for several years. That would be too miserable. Zhang Lufeng couldn't bear such a hardship. She immediately grabbed Li Sen's hand and said, "If someone asks you later, just say that you don't know. Do you understand?" Li Sen nodded in fear and trepidation. Zhang Lufeng was afraid that he didn't know the seriousness of the matter, so she said, "Keep your mouth shut. If the news leaks out, you'll be dead if I tell you." Li Sen nodded quickly, but at this time, Zhang Ling said loudly in the field, "The matter has been investigated clearly. Everyone, go back. I will take Tianhe and Ao Wushuang to go with Li Yundong. He must bear the consequences and responsibility for indulging his subordinates. Moreover, I think the destruction of this magic formation has something to do with Ao Wushuang. Although Li Yundong is powerful, he has a reason to go all over the world. I don't believe that he is an unreasonable person." Everyone nodded in agreement with Zhang Ling's words, but Li Sen was shocked. He subconsciously blurted out, "Huh? Eldest uncle is going to find Master. No, Master Li's trouble?" In Li Sen's heart, he had a deep sense of identity and dependence on Li Yundong. After all, Li Yundong was the one who had touched his desire to cultivate. He was not a fool. He knew that Li Yundong had been implicated in this matter because he had concealed it. Zhang Lufeng saw that he had spoken loudly and attracted everyone's attention. She was so angry that she stamped her foot on him. Li Sen was an honest person. Although he had been stamped, he still asked, "Xueqi, this matter has nothing to do with Master Li." Zhang Lufeng almost cried. She didn't know what to say under the strange gazes of everyone. She could only lower her voice and say, "Do you want to be punished? Shut up." Li Sen was not an idiot. He knew that if he concealed it, the Shixiang who had lent him the sword would be in trouble, and Li Yundong would also be implicated. Although he was a foreigner and had been a little cautious in China these days, he had a strong sense of chivalry in his bones. He was bold, chivalrous, and straightforward. At the party at Tiannan University, he had challenged Li Yundong without considering the severity of the matter. After being defeated, he had immediately been convinced and wanted to be apprenticed to Li Yundong. A person like him would never allow others to be implicated for no reason, especially when Li Yundong was involved. At this moment, Li Sen's previous fear and uneasiness all disappeared. He said with a serious face, "Xueqi, before I came to China, I learned a saying. This saying is, one person takes responsibility for what he has done. Although I haven't learned Chinese for long, I know the meaning and spirit of this sentence. Since this matter started because of me, then I should be the one to bear the responsibility. This is called one person takes responsibility for what he has done." After that, he tidied up his tight and somewhat ridiculous Taoist robe, held his head high, and strode out. Chapter 877. Li Sun strode out of the crowd, leaving Zhang Lufeng dumbfounded. She secretly stamped her feet and thought to herself, "Oh no, this blockhead is going out to die. What can I do?" She was as anxious as an ant on a hot pan. While she was pacing around, Li Sen had already walked out of the crowd and said loudly in Chinese, which was not standard, "Great Master, I have something to say." Although many foreigners had joined the cultivation world in recent years, Li Sen was a rare foreign cultivator in the Xueqi school. His special identity made the whole sect treat him very differently. They were curious, and enthusiastic about him. Therefore, when Li Sen stood up to speak, Zhang Ling suddenly frowned. She didn't know why this foreigner suddenly came out at this critical moment. However, Li Sen's special identity made her quite polite. In this Dharma-ending era, how to expand the power and influence of one's sect was the most important thing. After all, this was also the way to make a living. Although Zhang Ling secretly thought that Li Sen was a little reckless, she still said very politely, "Shouyang, what do you have to say?" The disciples of the Xueqi school were generally ranked according to keep the way and be benevolent, Chuanjin and Taiha. Sincere declaration of scripture, loyal and upright performance of gold. Chong Han Tong Yuan Yun, Gao Hongding De Luo. The 3 mountains are more prosperous, and the sea of fortune is surging. The sky is full of magic, and the universe is full of immortals. These 50 generations were ranked in order. Zhang Lufang was the youngest in the generation of Du, and her Taoist name was Du Yu. However, she felt that it was not a good name, so she never mentioned it. The senior brothers and sisters in the Taoist sect knew her habit, so they never called her by her Taoist name. They only called her by her name, so no one usually called her by her Taoist name. They just called her junior sister intimately or directly by her name. However, Li Sen had entered the sect very late, so he didn't even catch the last bus. He had to start from the first generation again and call his Taoist name Shouyang. However, foreigners were more open. Li Sen was no longer a virgin a few years ago. When the disciples of the Xueqi school talked about this foreigner in private, they all teased him that his Taoist name, Shouyang, did not live up to his name. Li Sen was a straightforward person. Other than Zhang Lufang and his own master, he did not pay much attention to other people's words and expressions. He did not know that he had always been the subject of ridicule in the sect. He walked straight to the center and said, "Great Uncle Master, light up." When Li Sen walked out, many people were still covering their mouths and laughing at him, pointing at the funny Taoist robe on his body. However, when they heard what he said, the crowd immediately went into an uproar. Zhang Ling's eyes widened and she couldn't help but ask, "What did you say?" When Li Sen saw that everyone was staring at him, he couldn't help but feel discouraged. Then he braced himself and said, "I broke this magic circle. I will take responsibility for what I did. Auntie, don't blame Master Li." Master Li Yundong. Zhang Ling was tongue-tied as she asked, "How did you destroy this formation? Where did you get the powerful magical weapon?" As she spoke, she suddenly glared at Zhang Lufang and asked, "Lufang, did you lend it to him?" Zhang Lufang was so scared that she was dumbfounded. Her pretty face was pale, and her lips trembled as she said in a trembling voice, "No. I didn't lend it to him." At this time, Zhang Tianhe said in a neither servile nor overbearing manner, "Great Uncle Master, I lent it to Li." Senior Zhang Ling saw that the matter had been investigated, and in the end, it had come back to the Xueqi school and implicated Zhang Tianhe. She suddenly flew into a rage and glared at Zhang Tianhe with a look of exasperation. "You lent him the 7-star sword? This is the powerful magical weapon of our Xueqi school. How dare you borrow it? Are you crazy?" Zhang Tianhe had rarely seen Zhang Ling roar at him like this. For a moment, he couldn't help but fall silent. Zhou Ping, who was standing to one side, was secretly anxious. She quickly winked at Zhang Tianhe, asking him to quickly clear his name and push all the blame onto the foreigner. Zhang Tianhe was silent for a while, then said, "This matter is my fault. It has nothing to do with Li Senator. He has just started cultivating and is very curious. When he saw the 7-star sword, I lent it to him to play with for a while." Zhang Ling was furious. "Play? This is one of the 5 great swords of Taoism. Is it for playing? How old are you? How can you still do such a thing? In the future, when the leader ascends to heaven, how can we rest assured that we will pass on the position of leader of the Xueqi school to you?" Zhang Tianhe lowered his head and said nothing, but his expression was surprisingly calm. Seeing that he was not speaking, Zhang Ling was even more angry. Zhou Ping was also so anxious that her heart was burning. She secretly stamped her feet and said, "Oh, my good Shirdi, aren't you too honest? Why do you have to bear the responsibility for everything? What does this foreigner have to do with you?" Zhou Ping didn't care about Li Sen's life or death. In her opinion, the life and death of other people had nothing to do with her. As long as her good Xueqi was safe, that was all that mattered. When Zhou Ping saw that Zhang Tianhe was like an iron general standing next to his mouth, not saying a word to defend himself and looking like he was about to be beaten, she couldn't help but stand up for him. However, she was also very particular about the way she spoke. Her gaze fell on Li Sen and she asked sternly, "Zhenren Shouyang, how did you destroy the magic circle?" Most foreigners were straightforward people. How could Li Sen know that there were so many twists and turns in the story? Seeing that this beautiful senior sister was asking him, he spilled the beans and told her everything that happened. However, he was careful not to drag Zhang Lufang into it. He only said that he was curious and wanted to take a look here. When everyone heard that Li Sen had fallen and that the absolute love extinguishing array, which had been secretly planned by the Xueqi school for 10 years, had fallen short of success, they couldn't help but look at each other and sigh secretly. Zhang Ling's face turned green and red as she listened. She glared at Li Sen fiercely, wishing she could eat him in one bite. After a while, Zhang Ling's chest heaved violently a few times. She gritted her teeth and said, "Shouyang, although this was an unintentional mistake, the crime is too great. The hard work of our Xueqi school over the past 10 years has all gone down the drain, and Wang Yuanshan has also died in vain. Do you know that you are wrong?" Li Sen lowered his head and knelt on the ground with a thud. He said in a low voice, "I know I was wrong. Please punish me, Xueqi." Zhang Ling gritted her teeth and looked at him, saying one word at a time, "Your crime cannot be redeemed, but considering that you have just entered the cultivation world and are a foreigner, I am now temporarily acting as the head of the sect and will expel you from the sect." Li Sen was shocked. He suddenly raised his head, his face full of fear and shock. He cried out involuntarily, "No." He had gotten used to staying in Mount Longhu these days. When he suddenly heard that he had been expelled from the sect, he felt as if he had been struck by lightning. Zhang Liufang's eyes also widened in an instant. Finally, she couldn't help but cry out involuntarily, "No, this is my fault. It has nothing to do with Blockhead." She lost control of her emotions and even called out Li Sen's nickname for a moment. Zhang Tianhe was also shocked and said, "Eldest aunt, this is too serious. In the future, how can there be foreign cultivators who will convert to our Xueqi school?" Zhang Ling said angrily, "Bull*T, all of you shut up. Do you know how much manpower and material resources our Xueqi school has spent for this absolute love extinguishing formation? Now the magic formation has been destroyed for no reason, and Wang Yuanshan's death has been worthless. Now all the cultivators in the world are thinking about Li Yundong. Who will remember how much our Xueqi school has paid for this? Tell me, if you were me, what would you do?" Zhang Ling was nicknamed the Lady of the Earthly Fire. When she was angry, her eyebrows were almost standing on end, and her power was extremely terrifying. For a moment, no one dared to plead for Li Senior. In the cultivation world, expulsion was the most severe punishment, because which other sects would dare to casually accept an expelled disciple of the Xueqi school? This was tantamount to cutting off this person's path of cultivation and the idea of becoming an immortal. Therefore, in their opinion, there was no more severe punishment than this. Even if he was locked up for 10 years, in the end, he would only be delayed in cultivation by 10 years. Moreover, during these 10 years, he would not be completely locked up in a small house. He would just not be allowed to set foot in the secular world. It was just that he could concentrate on cultivation, which was not necessarily a disaster. But now, Li Sen was about to be expelled from the sect. For a moment, everyone was secretly afraid that Zhang Ling's anger would burn them. Moreover, they also knew that Zhang Ling wanted to protect Zhang Tianhe and avoid implicating Zhang Lufang, so the punishment for Li Sen was particularly severe. After Zhang Ling shouted, she said angrily to Zhang Lufang and Zhang Tianhe, "Don't you two even think about running away. I'll ask the sect leader later and let him punish you." Zhang Tianshi was a gentle person who did not get angry easily. Even when he saw the absolute love extinguishing formation being destroyed with his own eyes, he just sighed. If he was asked to deal with this matter, he would probably raise the board high and then let it fall gently. After Zhang Ling dealt with the matter here, she waved her sleeve and shouted, "It's settled. Zhang Lufang, Zhang Tianhe, come with me to see the sect leader. The rest of you can go back by yourselves." Zhang Tianhe glanced at Li Sen, sighed softly, shook his head, and turned to follow Zhang Ling. Zhang Lufang looked at Li Sen with tears in her eyes. She could not move her feet, and her heart was full of guilt. Zhang Ling turned her head and shouted at her. Zhang Lufeng, why are you still standing there? Do you want to be expelled as well? Zhang Lufeng was so scared that her whole body trembled. She didn't dare to look at Li Sen again. She lowered her head and wiped her tears as she followed Zhang Ling. As she walked, she secretly looked back, only to see Li Sen standing in the crowd, not knowing what to do. At this time, although there were many Taoist priests of the Xueqi school who sympathized with Li Sen, they did not dare to anger Zhang Ling for Li Sen's sake. They were afraid that the fire would also burn their heads, so they all kept a distance from Li Sen and pointed at him from afar. Li Sen was in a daze and stayed where he was for a long time. After a while, he came to his senses. When he woke up, he found that he seemed to be sleepwalking. He didn't know when he had reached the foot of Mount Longhu. He stood alone in the mountains and looked up. He saw the blue sky was majestic, but he didn't know where the end of the world was. He looked around and saw the winding paths in the deep mountains and old forests. He didn't know where he was. The more Li Sen thought about it, the more frightened and confused he became. He remembered that he, Chris, and Alba had gone to China to seek the Tao. In the end, the three of them had gone their separate ways. He didn't know whether the two of them were alive or dead. It was not easy for him to start cultivating, but he had encountered this disaster. The ups and downs along the way were really indescribable. Although he was a man, he couldn't help but cry at this time. He cried alone for a while, then slowly recovered and thought, if you don't want me, I'll go to my master. In Li Sen's heart, although Li Yundong was not his master and disciple, he had always regarded Li Yundong as his master. Although he was not loyal, he was quite devout. Although Li Sen was careless, he also knew that he had made such a big mistake. If he went to Li Yundong to seek refuge, would he cause trouble for him? Would he cause him to despise him? Although he had been seeking the Tao with great tenacity along the way, he also had a very high self-esteem. At this time, he had been expelled from the sect, and his self-esteem was unprecedentedly high. He was afraid that others would look down on him and that he would bring trouble to others. For a moment, Li Sen was at a loss at the foot of the mountain and didn't know where to go. Just when he was at a loss, he suddenly heard a voice coming from beside him. Amateus, fellow Taoist, we meet again. When Li Sen heard the voice, he was stunned. He turned around and saw a middle-aged man in a black Taoist robe standing in front of him. The man had a short beard and looked capable. He was the great cultivator of the Shen sect, the overseas branch of the Xueqi school, Yin Kong, whom Li Sen had met once at the side of Mount Longhu. Chapter 878. When Li Sen suddenly saw Yin Kong, he couldn't help but be stunned. He stammered, "It's you? What are you doing here?" Although he had been expelled by Zhang Ling, he still had a good impression of the Xueqi school in his heart. He had also seen this person who had once been an enemy of the Xueqi school, so he immediately became hostile. Seeing Li Sen's expression, Yin Kong couldn't help but laugh and say, "Amateus, all the Taoist friends in the world are one family. Mount Longhu is the ancestral court of our Xueqi school. Although we are now opening a branch overseas, we are not outsiders. Why can't we come here?" Yin Kong's words were reasonable, and then he said, "However, as far as I know, Zhenren Shouyang, you don't regard yourself as an outsider, but it seems that someone does." Li Sen's expression suddenly became gloomy, and he lowered his head in silence. Yin Kong smiled and said, "The Xueqi school is not doing well now. The head doesn't care about worldly affairs, and Zhang Ling is headstrong. She doesn't know how to cherish a talent like Zhenren Shouyang. In order to protect her own disciple, she expelled you. It's really unreasonable, hateful, and annoying." Li Sen was careless, but he didn't think about how Yin Kong knew these things. He just said in a low voice, "The problem is indeed my fault. They can't be blamed." Yin Kong clapped his hands and sighed. "Zhenren Shouyang is really kind. I admire him. However, I'd like to ask, Zhenren Shouyang, now that they have expelled you, where are you going now?" Li Sen said blankly, I don't know." Seeing Li Sen's expression, Yin Kong didn't beat around the bush. He simply went straight to the point, laughed and said, "To tell you the truth, before the head of the Shen sect asked me to come to Mount Longhu, he had predicted that I would meet a great cultivator here, so he asked me to stay here. Sure enough, I've been waiting for him today. Zhenren Li, since there is no one here, there will be a place for you." Our Shentian sect will open the door to you at any time. It was impossible for Li Sen not to understand such straightforward words, but he didn't expect that as soon as he was expelled from the Zhengyi school, he would be immediately invited by the Shentian sect. For a moment, he was at a loss and didn't know what to do. Should he go to Li Yundong or follow Yin Kong to join the Shentian sect? For a moment, Li Sen hesitated and looked around blankly. At this moment, Zhang Ling led Zhang Tianhe and Zhang Lufang all the way to the back of the main peak of Mount Longhu. After arriving at the Immortal Afterglow cave, she turned around and said to the two of them, "Wait here. I'll go in and talk to the sect leader." The Immortal Dawn Cavern was located halfway up the main peak. It was surrounded by mountain ranges and lush trees. Below the cavern, clear water flowed like satin. It was the most spiritual place in Mount Longhu. Only the sect master had the qualifications to cultivate in this place. After Zhang Ling entered the Immortal Cloud Cave, she came to an empty stone cave. She bowed slightly and said to the empty stone cave, "Sect leader, I have something to see you about." After a while, a voice came out of nowhere from the stone cave. It was gentle and had a hint of vicissitudes. "Zhang Ling, I already know why you are here. I feel that this matter of yours is a little inappropriate." Zhang Tianche's magic power was great and his magical powers were vast. At this time, he was cultivating in a closed secret room in the stone cave. He was speaking through the thick stone wall in the secret room, but his voice could pass through as usual. His cultivation of magic power was evident. When Zhang Ling heard Zhang Tianche's words, she suddenly raised her head in surprise. "What's inappropriate?" Zhang Tianche said lightly, "You expelled Shou Yang from the sect, but it has benefited the Shentian sect." Zhang Ling was shocked. "Shentian sect? Where did you get that from?" Zhang Tianche's voice came leisurely, echoing in the stone cave. "Yin Kong of the Shentian sect has been staying nearby. I was wondering about his intentions. Now it seems that he has come for Shou Yang. What a good plan." Zhang Tianche said calmly, but Zhang Ling was furious. "The Shentian sect has been trying to steal the position of our Zhengyi school. Now they are trying to steal our people?" Celestial Master Zhang said lightly, "We were the ones who drove them out, and they just took them in." Zhang Ling was stunned when she heard this, and then she said angrily, "I don't believe that a dull foreigner who can't even walk can achieve great things in the future." Zhang Tianche was silent for a while and said, "Xueqi, people's fate is unpredictable. No one can judge a person's future fate and fortune. Isn't this obvious in Li Yundong? What's more, even if Shou Yang doesn't achieve anything in the future, this is a gesture of respect for the wise. It's really hurtful for us." Zhang Ling was silent for a while, and her heart had slowly calmed down. She felt a little regretful. She gritted her teeth, stamped her feet and said, "Then I'll go after him now." However, Zhang Tianche immediately said, "That's even more inappropriate. Since you have said it, you should not go back on your words. If you change your mind, how will your disciples look at you?" Zhang Ling raised her head and sighed. "This won't do, that won't do. What should I do?" While she was sighing, she heard Zhang Lufang shouting outside the cave, "Eldest aunt, it's not convenient for you to go. I'll go find Li Mu." "Shou Yang, come back." Zhang Ling furrowed her brows and subconsciously wanted to reprimand this unruly girl. However, a thought flashed through her mind and she endured it. After all, it was indeed not appropriate for her to go. It would be best if Zhang Lufang could go and persuade Li Senior. But after a while, Zhang Lufang came back alone. As soon as she saw Zhang Ling, she burst into tears and said, "He's gone. I don't know where he went." Although Zhang Ling regretted it in her heart, she refused to admit it in front of the juniors. She shouted stubbornly, "What are you crying for? It's improper in front of the leader. Is our Zhengyi school going to overturn the sky because of Li Sen?" Zhang Tianche, who had been silent for a long time, suddenly sighed and said, "Shajib. In the future, the leader of our Zhengyi school must be Li Sen." Zhang Ling was shocked. "What? Leader, are you serious? Is this the secret of heaven? Since you knew that he was so important, why didn't you stop me in the beginning?" Zhang Tianche asked in response, "Can I change heaven's destiny if I stop you? Then what's the point of me stopping Wang Yuanshan from being with Ao Wushuang?" Zhang Ling was suddenly speechless. Zhang Tianche sighed and said, Heaven's destiny is like a ball. If you stop it, it will bypass your obstruction, continue to move forward, and eventually reach its destination. Zhang Ling was silent for a while and said in a low voice, "Leader, what should we do now?" Zhang Tianche pondered for a while and said, "Zhang Tianhe." Zhang Tianhe had been looking down at the side, like a stone man in meditation. At this time, when he heard Zhang Tianche call his name, he responded and walked in from outside. He bowed respectfully and said, "Leader, I've done something wrong. Please punish me." Although Zhang Tianhe was the son of Celestial Master Zhang, there wasn't the slightest hint of filial piety in the tone of Celestial Master Zhang and Zhang Tianhe at this moment. It was as though they were purely master and disciple. Zhang Tianche said slowly, "You're incompetent, impulsive, and frivolous. I punish you to seclusion in the side peak for 5 years. Are you convinced?" Zhang Ling opened her mouth and blurted out, "Leader, isn't that too harsh? 5 years? How many 5 years can a person live for?" Zhang Tianche said lightly, "It's too early to say whether it's a blessing or a curse for me to put him in confinement for 5 years. Hearing this, Zhang Ling immediately shut her mouth, while Zhang Tianhe bowed deeply and said, "I have no objection." Zhang Tianche said again, "Zhang Lufang." Zhang Lufang, who was crying, wiped away her tears and choked with sobs. "Leader, are you going to confine me as well? Can you give me a few years less?" Although Zhang Ling had a straight face, her words almost made her laugh out of anger. She thought to herself, how did Zhang Kongyun teach his disciple? How could he teach such a lawless disciple? How could he talk to the leader like this? Did he think it was a vegetable market? Bargaining? There was a slight smile in Zhang Tianche's voice. He said, "Although you have good intentions, your good intentions have caused trouble. I want to punish you, but after all, you are not my disciple. Go to your master, Zhang Kongyun, and let him punish you." Zhang Ling was stunned. She knew that everyone knew how much Zhang Kongyun doted on Zhang Lufang. If Zhang Kongyun punished her, she would be locked up for a few days at most. She couldn't help but want to say, "Leader, isn't this punishment too light?" But when the words were about to come out of her mouth, she swallowed them back. She thought to herself, since the leader has made such an arrangement, he must have his reasons. It's not good for me to say more. Zhang Lufang hadn't expected that Zhang Tianche would punish her so lightly, and she couldn't come to her senses for a while. Seeing her in a daze, Zhang Ling couldn't help but shout, "What are you waiting for? Hurry up and thank the leader for his kindness." Zhang Lufang quickly thanked him. "Thank you for your magnanimity. Lufang won't dare to do it again. But my Shirdi." She raised her head and looked pitifully in the direction of Zhang Tianche's voice. She wanted him to go to the Shen sect and ask for Li San back. But before she could finish her words, Zhang Ling had already guessed what she was going to say. She immediately shouted, "Zhang Lufang, what do you want to say? You're like a clay bodhisattva crossing the river. You can't even protect yourself, and you still want to meddle in other people's business? How could the sect leader do such a thing?" Zhang Lufang lowered her head, looking sad and silent. At this time, Zhang Tianche said in a gentle voice, "Well, get up. The guests are coming. Don't let them see you like this. Don't lose face for our Xueqi school." Zhang Ling asked curiously, "Guests? Where are the guests from?" Zhang Tianche chuckled softly and didn't say anything. After a while, a loud voice came from the foot of the mountain. Li Yundong, the leader of the Fox Zen school, with his disciples Su Chan, Zhou Qin, and Zi Yuan, the acting leader of the Linggong sect, have come to pay a visit to the leader of the Xueqi school, Zhenren Zhang Tianche. Li Yundong's words were long and lingering, clearly reaching the ears of Zhang Ling, Zhang Lufang, and Zhang Tianhe. The three of them suddenly widened their eyes. Zhang Lufang was even more surprised and said, "Ah? Is Li Wudi here?" Chapter 879. When Zhang Ling heard the news of Li Yundong's visit, she was stunned and blurted out, "He came so fast." As she said this, she turned her head to look in the direction of Zhang Tianche and said nervously, "Leader, do you want to see him?" Zhang Tianche was silent for a while and said lightly, "He didn't come here to see me, but to see Ao Wushuang. Seeing me is just a superficial statement. And now the time is not right. When the time is right, I will naturally meet him." Zhang Ling knew that Li Yundong was no longer the greenhorn he used to be. She was far inferior to him in terms of status and cultivation. What's more, Li Yundong had come with a great victory. She was very afraid that she would be suppressed by him and lose the face of the Xueqi school. However, seeing that her Shurdi was unwilling to go out to meet him, she had no choice but to say, "Then I'll go down the mountain to meet him." Zhang Tianchi said, "Tianhe, Lu Feng, you all have some fate with Zhenren Li. Go down the mountain to meet him together." Zhang Tianhe and Zhang Lufeng looked at each other, nodded in agreement, and followed Zhang Ling out of the immortal cloud cave. The last time Li Yundong had come to Mount Longhu with Su Chan in a low-key manner to see Zhang Tianchi, he had been unceremoniously turned away and almost fought with Zhang Kongyun. This time, he had come in a high-profile manner with Su Chan, Zi Yuan, and Zhou Qin. It was really 4 masters of lightning retribution appearing at the same time. It could be said that 1 king and 3 immortals had appeared. The power of this lineup was enough to scare people to death. Zhang Ling of the Xueqi school did not dare to be negligent. In order to compete with Li Yundong and the others in terms of lineup, she had mobilized almost all the forces of the Xueqi school. Even Zhang Kongyun, who was in closed-door cultivation, was alarmed. Except for Zhang Tianchi, almost all the people of the Xueqi school had come out. At the foot of the mountain, Li Yundong heard a crisp ringing sound coming from the top of the mountain. Looking around, he saw a few figures flashing around the bend of the mountain road at the foot of the mountain. It was Zhang Tianhe and Zhang Lufeng. Zhang Lufeng had just experienced a great change, and her excitement had become a little depressed. She looked at Li Yundong curiously and saw that although the famous Li Wudi had come with the power of defeating the mystical silver fox, there was no complacency on his face. On the contrary, he was more approachable than usual. There was a faint smile on his face, which made people involuntarily feel like getting close to him. Her sad mood because of Li Sen's departure seemed to be much better. Zhang Lufeng couldn't help but ask, "Li Wudi, have you reached the highest level of Golden Immortal?" Among them, Golden Immortals referred to great immortals of the same realm and status as Buddha in Buddhism. During the reign of Emperor Xianzong of the Tang dynasty, there was a Taoist priest named Shi Jianwu who wrote a book. In his book, Zhonglu's collected works of Taoism, he divided the immortals into 5 types: ghost immortals, human immortals, earth immortals, celestial immortals, and celestial immortals. The origin of celestial immortals referred to the highest realm of Taoism's 6 realms and 36 layers of heaven, the 6th realm, the heavenly overarching heaven. Therefore, heavenly immortals were also known as great heavenly immortals or great heavenly golden immortals. After a cultivator transcended the thunder tribulation, the heavenly thunder was no longer a threat to him. It was difficult for the heavens to subdue such a person, so they could only acknowledge the cultivator's identity as an immortal. However, immortals were also divided into different grades. Ghost immortals referred to cultivators who had cultivated to the point where their bodies were destroyed and their corpses were dismembered and ascended. Their yang spirit did not disappear, and they could exist in the world of ghosts for a long time. The representative figure was King Yama. The representative figure of human immortals in the secular world was Jigong, who was talked about by the world. The representative figures of earth immortals were the famous 8 immortals, such as Lu Dongbin, Han Zhongli, Zhang Guilao, and so on. Immortals mostly referred to famous immortals such as Tai Bai Jingxing and Erlang Shen. Celestial immortals, also known as Zenith Heaven Golden Immortals, were the highest cultivation of immortals. At most, they could cultivate to the point where their body and spirit were wonderful, and they were not bound by life and death. They could concentrate and disperse freely, and no one in the world could defeat them. In the heaven realm, the most famous celestial immortals and Zenith Heaven Golden Immortals were the Yu Huang of the Haotian Palace. Ever since the Great War of the Gods in the Shang and Zhou dynasties, the heaven realm had not allowed golden immortals to descend to the mortal world. Even immortals were not allowed to easily set foot in the mortal world. Therefore, there were no living golden immortals in the mortal world. Although Zhang Liufeng's question didn't sound like a big problem, after careful consideration, it was a little inappropriate. The subtext seemed to be saying, "Li Yundong, your cultivation is already so high. When are you going to ascend?" Such a question was a very taboo for a cultivator, especially a great cultivator, because in other words, it was actually asking, "When are you going to die?" Zhang Tianhe heard the rudeness in Zhang Liufeng's words and immediately glared at her. "Lu Feng, I'm so rude. Quickly apologized to Zhenren Li." Li Yundong and Zhang Lufeng had played a lot of tricks. He knew that she was a straightforward girl, almost without the slightest bit of scheming, even worse than Su Chan. He knew that Zhang Lufeng did not mean what she said, so he didn't care and said with a smile, "It's not that serious." As he said this, he said to Zhang Lufeng with a smile, "Golden immortals are far behind, and I can't be called invincible. There is one person in the world who can be called invincible." Zhang Lufeng first made a face at Zhang Tianhe and said in a low voice, "Super Li is not as petty as you." As she said this, she asked Li Yundong curiously, "Then who is invincible?" Li Yundong smiled and said, "The mystical silver fox." Zhang Lufeng did not witness the earth-shattering battle of sealing demons with her own eyes, so she naturally did not know the terror of the mystical silver fox. She only heard from Zhang Tianhe and Zhou Ping that Li Yundong and the others had sealed the mystical silver fox, so she thought that Li Yundong had become even more powerful than the mystical silver fox. But in fact, Zhang Tianhe and Zhou Ping had only seen the end of the battle, but they had not seen the dangers and hardships before. Therefore, when they came back, they only told them about the process of Li Yundong sealing the mystical silver fox. When Zhang Lufeng heard Li Yundong say that the mystical silver fox was invincible in the world, she couldn't help laughing. "Ah, you are so cunning. You said that the mystical silver fox is invincible in the world, but you, Super Li, defeated the invincible in the world. Isn't that the invincible in the world?" Li Yundong saw that she was naive, so he said with a smile, "What are you talking about? I didn't defeat the mystical silver fox alone. Su Chan, Zi Yuan, Zhou Qin, and the cultivators of all sects in the Middle Sun cultivation world have contributed a lot. Without them, I wouldn't have been able to defeat the mystical silver fox alone." When Zhang Tianhe saw that Li Yundong was still so humble after such a great victory, he secretly admired him in his heart. He couldn't help but regard him as the goal and benchmark that he wanted to catch up with in the future. At this time he said respectfully, "Zhenren Li, let's not talk nonsense. Please come up the mountain with us. Our fellow disciples of the Zhangyi school have been waiting for a long time." The purpose of Li Yundong's high-profile visit this time was to let the Zhangyi school understand his current strength and status, so that they would not dare to do anything to Ao Wushuang, so as to avoid any tragedy. This time, when he saw that the two people from the Zhangyi school who had come out to meet him were Zhang Tianhe and Zhang Lufeng, who were quite friendly to him, he knew that the Zhangyi school wanted to make friends with him and no longer regarded him as an enemy. Li Yundong made up his mind. He turned his head and nodded to Su Chan with a smile, indicating for her to calm down. When Su Chan saw Li Yundong looking at her, she smiled sweetly. The last time she came to Mount Longhu with Li Yundong, she had been beaten and killed. This time, she was treated as a distinguished guest and was respectfully welcomed up the mountain. Her face was full of glory. If it weren't for the fact that she was worried about her master and there were outsiders present at this time, she would have hugged Li Yundong's arm and kissed him hard. Li Yundong nodded to Zi Yuan and Zhou Qin again. The group of people walked up the mountain path. At this time, the Zhangyi school had already sealed the mountain, and there were no tourists on the mountain. Halfway up the mountain, they saw a stone archway at the gate of the mountain halfway up the mountain. It was the gate of the Zhangyi school. The plaque of the gate was arched and majestic. Many disciples of the Zhangyi school stood on both sides, and in the middle stood Zhang Ling, Zhang Kongyun, and other cultivators of the older generation of the Zhangyi school. Li Yundong saw that the Zhangyi school had mobilized a large number of people to receive them at the gate of the mountain. It was no longer the situation where no one paid any attention to them after they went up the mountain. He couldn't help but sigh in his heart. The Zhangyi school was the leader of the Chinese Taoist cultivation world. Their actions showed that the largest cultivation sect of Chinese Taoism had officially recognized their strength and status. They believed that they had the qualifications to be on an equal footing with Zhang Tianshi. But who was Zhang Tianshi? He was known as the Celestial Master in the Song dynasty, the Master of Heaven. He did not bow to the emperor and was in charge of the talismans of the three mountains. Even today, in the age of chaos, he was a big shot who could directly listen to the heavens. He had walked step by step from an otaku to such a point. Looking back, it was really like a dream. Zhang Ling also looked at Li Yundong with a complicated look in her eyes. Although she was still a little unwilling in her heart, at this time, the situation was stronger than people. Li Yundong had suddenly risen. At this time, he had become so strong that even if they didn't want to admit it, they had to admit it. Zhang Ling calmed down, stepped forward, and saluted, saying, "Zhang Ling of the Zhangyi school is temporarily the leader of the sect. Greetings to you, Leader Li. Li Yundong also stepped forward and saluted, saying, "I don't dare. Greetings to all the seniors." Many seniors of the Xueqi school were afraid that Li Yundong would be aggressive with the power of a great victory. At this time, seeing him so humble, they all nodded in their hearts and couldn't help but have a higher evaluation of Li Yundong. Zhongling also breathed a sigh of relief. She seemed to have forgotten the dirty things that had happened between her and Li Yundong before. She smiled and exchanged greetings with Li Yundong. Li Yundong also acted as if the previous unpleasantness had never happened. He just smiled and talked to her. After the two of them exchanged pleasantries for a while, Li Yundong finally got to the point. "Zhenren Zhang, my disciple Ao Wushuang has offended the forbidden area of your sect. I already know about this. This time, I came to apologize to you. I wonder where Ao Wushuang is now?" Zhongling thought to herself, "She's here." She tilted her head slightly and looked at a disciple of the Xueqi school who was in charge of punishment. This disciple was one of the guards of the Absolute Love Extinguishing Formation. At this time he whispered to Zhongling, "She is still locked in the sword cage." Zhongling was slightly angry. She glared at him and said in a low voice, "Let her out immediately. Hurry up, go and invite Ao Wushuang here." The disciple immediately turned around and left, but after a while, he came back with a sad face and said nervously in a low voice, "Auntie, something happened." Zhongling was a person who cared a lot about face. Her heart skipped a beat, and then she became furious. She couldn't help but raise her voice. "What happened?" Chapter 880. Seeing that everyone was looking at him, the disciple said to Zhongling with a pained expression, "She refuses to move, and we can't do anything about it." Zhongling was shocked and angry. She thought to herself, "What is this fox spirit doing? Does she know that the leader of the Fox Zen sect has come at this time and is deliberately putting on airs to embarrass our Xueqi school?" The more Zhongling thought about it, the more she felt that this was the case. She couldn't help but feel angry in her heart, but she managed to hold it in. After glaring at the disciple, she suppressed her anger, turned her face, smiled at Li Yundong, and said, "Leader Li, the disciples of your sect are unwilling to come. It seems that we have to wait for you to go. We can't invite you." Li Yundong had also heard what Zhongling had said to the previous disciple of the Xueqi school. He remained silent, smiled faintly, and said, "Then please take me to the Lady of the Earthly Fire. I think there must be some misunderstanding." Seeing that Li Yundong was not going to investigate this matter, Zhongling was a little relieved and took the opportunity to explain things clearly. She said, "Leader Li, our Xueqi school has just investigated this matter. The destruction of the Absolute Love Extinguishing Formation has nothing to do with Ao Wushuang, but this matter was caused by a combination of factors. It was caused by our own people, so I won't go into detail with you here. However, it is a fact that Ao Wushuang broke into the forbidden area of our Xueqi school. Although Ao Wushuang is a fox spirit, she is infatuated and touching. Moreover, Leader Li has helped our Xueqi school many times, so we hope that we can turn hostility into friendship. We also hope that Leader Li will restrain your subordinates in the future, and that such a thing will not happen again in the future." Breaking into the forbidden area was a very serious matter for any sect. If they were to be held accountable, the consequences would be very serious. However, the meaning of Zhongling's words was very obvious. The Xueqi school did not want to argue with Li Yundong about this matter. They hoped that the matter would be resolved. Li Yundong saw that the other party had extended an olive branch to him, and his attitude was quite humble. Although he had a lot of friction with the Xueqi school before, at this time he had already seen through life and death. Looking back at the past, he immediately smiled. Li Yundong said with a smile, "The Lady of the Earthly Fire is too serious. When I see Ao Wushuang, I will definitely persuade her to apologize to your sect. In the future, I will restrain them more." Zhongling hadn't expected Li Yundong's cultivation to be so high, yet he was so modest. He was like a different person from the sharp Li Yundong in her previous impression. She couldn't help but be surprised. She seriously looked at this overly young great cultivator in front of her. In her impression, even her younger brothers, Zhang Tianchi and Wang Yuanshan, did not have such cultivation in such a realm when they were at Li Yundong's age. Throughout the 2,000 years of Chinese history, there were very few Taoist cultivators who could cultivate to such a realm at the age of 20. When Wang Chongyang cultivated and achieved the Tao, he was already 66 years old. When Zhang Sanfeng met fiery dragon Zhenren, he was already 77 years old. When Zhang Daoling traveled to seek the Tao, he was already 58 years old. When immortal Chen Tuan, the founder of China's Tai Chi culture and Zhang Sanfeng's grandmaster, achieved the Tao, he was already 12 years old. Among the Buddhist cultivators, there were many who had reached such a realm at such a young age. However, the only one who had such magical power and was well versed in both Buddhism and Taoism was Ba Si Ba Mei, who was the most talented cultivator in the world. Zhang Ling sighed inwardly. No matter how prejudiced she was, she couldn't help but be impressed by Li Yundong's bearing at this time. She said with some doubt and hesitation, "Master Li, there's something I don't know if I should say." Li Yundong smiled and cupped his hands. "The Lady of the Earthly Fire is very knowledgeable. You must be very knowledgeable. If you have anything to say, just say it. I'm all ears." Hearing this, Zhang Ling thought more highly of Li Yundong. She said cautiously, "Master Li, with your current cultivation realm, you should be writing books and establishing your own sect. Why do you want to stick to the Fox Zen sect?" Zhang Ling was very impressed by Li Yundong's bearing and character at this time, so her words were quite tactful, completely different from the anger she used to have. Hearing this, Li Yundong didn't comment. He just smiled and said, "The Lady of the Earthly Fire has a point. I'll go back and think about it." Zhang Ling glanced at him and sighed in her heart. If such a great cultivator is bound to the Fox Zen sect for the rest of his life, it will be a great loss to our cultivation world. The fox demon is very charming and has done a lot of harm to people. Thinking of this, she glanced at Su Chan, who was standing to one side. She saw that her eyebrows were picturesque, her figure was romantic, and there was an indescribable charm between her eyebrows. She looked at Li Yundong with infatuation. Her charming and infatuated appearance was really lovable. Standing together with Zi Yuan and Zhou Qin, many disciples of the Zhangyi school were still sneaking glances at her. She was so disgusted by the fox demon that she couldn't help but praise. "I feel sorry for her, let alone an old servant." Zhang Ling sighed in her heart. Wang Yuanshan had been harmed by Ao Wushuang. She hoped that Li Yundong would not be harmed in the future. Zhang Ling said to Li Yundong, "Master Li, please come with me. I'll take you to see Ao Wushuang." Li Yundong nodded with a smile. He turned around and said hello to Su Chan and the others, then followed Zhang Ling. They walked down the main peak and came to the side peak. From afar, Zhang Ling saw several disciples of the Zhangyi school standing there at a loss. When they saw her, they looked terrified. Zhang Ling was slightly shocked and quickly took 2 steps forward. "What's wrong? Where's Ao Wushuang?" one of the disciples said with a bitter face. "She ran away." Zhang Ling was shocked. "What? How did she run away? Didn't you say that she refused to move just now?" The disciple was speechless. Another disciple beside him said in a low voice, "We saw that Ao Wushuang refused to move. She just said that she would wait for Wang Yuanshan to come before she would leave. So we were afraid that she would delay things, so we told her that Sherbo Wang Yuanshan had passed away." Zhang Ling was so angry that she almost jumped up. She looked at these disciples with disappointment and said, "And then?" The previous disciple said in a low voice, "Then she didn't believe it and ran away." Zhang Ling felt that her temples were beating rapidly. She had lost face and the face of the Zhangyi school. She didn't know how to explain it to Li Yundong. The smile on Li Yundong's face darkened slightly. He frowned and was about to speak when Zi Yuan, who was next to him, gently tugged at his sleeve, winked at him, and looked at the top of the side peak. At this time Su Chan suddenly blurted out, "Ah, I know where Master has gone." As she said this, she rushed up the mountain. Zhang Ling couldn't even shout. As soon as she opened her mouth, she saw Li Yundong, Zi Yuan, and the others also flying up the mountain in a flash. She smiled bitterly and sighed. After glaring at these disciples, she waved her hand and followed them with many disciples of the Zhangyi school. After Li Yundong and the others flew to the top of the mountain, they saw Ao Wushuang standing alone on the edge of the cliff beside a huge wind-dust stone. Her eyes were infatuated with the end of the world, and she was motionless. When Su Chan saw Ao Wushuang, she immediately rushed over and shouted in surprise, "Master!" But when she rushed to the front of Ao Wushuang, she suddenly stopped and looked at her in surprise. Su Chan widened her eyes and looked at Ao Wushuang in front of her, only to see that she looked haggard. She didn't look as cold and strong as she used to. Although her eyes were still firm, her hair was covered with frost, which was obviously caused by the cold weather. For a cultivator like her, this was simply inconceivable. Only when she was careless and couldn't control the qi and blood in her body could such a result be caused. Li Yundong frowned secretly and wanted to go forward to see the situation, but he was gently pulled back by Zi Yuan. Li Yundong looked back and saw Zi Yuan shaking her head at him. She said in a low voice, "Don't go. Now only the people closest to Ao Wushuang can talk to her. If we go, there will be problems." Su Chan saw that Ao Wushuang was like a walking corpse, and her whole body was lifeless. She was shocked and afraid. She wanted to reach out to pull her, but when she reached out in the air, she couldn't help but freeze. She was afraid that she would disturb her and cause trouble. Su Chan said in a trembling voice, "Master, what's wrong with you, Master?" When Ao Wushuang heard this familiar voice, her eyes, which were staring into the distance, moved slightly, but there was still no vitality in them. She said in an empty voice, "Who are you?" Su Chan had never seen her like this before. She couldn't help but burst into tears. "It's me, Chaner, your favorite disciple." "Master, what's wrong with you? Don't scare me." "Chaner?" Only then did Ao Wushuang's eyes have a trace of vitality. She slowly turned her head, and her empty eyes gradually focused on Su Chan. Ao Wushuang smiled slowly and reached out to touch Su Chan's cheek. "Chaner, are you here? Have you come back from Japan? Tell Master. Wang Yuanshan is not dead, right?" How could Su Chan say whether it was right or wrong? She burst into tears and threw herself into Ao Wushuang's arms, sobbing. "Master, don't scare me. I can't live without you." Seeing her like this, the expression on Ao Wushuang's face became softer and softer. While stroking Su Chan's long black hair, she looked up at Li Jiandong in the distance and said, "You already have someone who loves you. Why do you need me?" Su Chan was so scared that she forgot to cry. She suddenly raised her head and looked at Ao Wushuang with tears in her eyes. "Master, what do you mean?" Ao Wushuang smiled slightly and gently wiped the tears from her face. "You've grown up. You'll get used to living without me." Su Chan became even more terrified and shouted, "No, no." Ao Wushuang said softly, "I'm going to wait here for Wang Yuanshan to come back." "Are you going to wait here with me? Don't you want to live a good life with your lover?" Su Chan hugged Ao Wushuang tightly and buried her head in her arms. She shouted, "Then I'll wait with you." Ao Wushuang smiled gently. "Last time, I waited for him for 10 years before he appeared. This time, I don't know how long it will take. Are you going to wait with me? Don't be silly." Su Chan cried, "Master, I'll wait with you. I'll wait with you all the time." Ao Wushuang sighed softly and looked up at Li Jiandong. She said slowly, "I'll entrust her to you. You have to treat her well." As she said this, she shook her arms and suddenly threw Su Chan out. Li Jiandong was quick to react and caught Su Chan. At this time, Su Chan was shocked and scared. She was so frightened that her qi and blood were in chaos. There was no Dharma power or Zhen qi left. Seeing Ao Wushuang's behavior, she was so scared that her hands and feet went soft and she couldn't stand up for a while. Li Jiandong held the little girl in his arms and sighed softly. "Senior Ao Wushuang, what if Wang Yuanshan can't come back?" Ao Wushuang smiled and said in a daze, "Someone told me the same thing 10 years ago, but in the end, I still waited for him to come back." Li Jiandong felt sad when he heard this, so he said, "I mean, what if it takes a long time for him to come back? 10 years, 20 years? 100 years? Or even 1,000 years?" Although he didn't make it clear, he was actually telling Ao Wushuang that Wang Yuanshan was dead and that he couldn't come back. But Ao Wushuang didn't seem to understand. She looked into the distance and said in a low voice, "Then I'll wait for him for 10 years, 20 years, 100 years, 1,000 years. Last time, I waited for him. This time I can do it too." After that, she looked at Su Chan lovingly for the last time, then turned her head and pinched her fingers. A talisman slowly floated out of her sleeve and then burned into ashes in mid-air. In an instant, Ao Wushuang's body crackled, and the stones and soil under her feet rose up, burying her in it. She turned into a big stone, and only the shape of a person could be vaguely recognized. This change shocked everyone on the mountain and rendered them speechless. They looked at the infatuated and stubborn Ao Wushuang, who had sealed herself and petrified in order to wait for Wang Yuanshan. She had turned into a big stone and waited for him here. Many cultivators of the Zhengyi school, who had a strong hostility to Ao Wushuang's fox spirit body, were shocked by her infatuation. They stared blankly at the big stone and were all speechless. For a moment, the side peak of Mount Longhu was silent. Only Su Chan's heart-wrenching cries lingered in the mountain stream and did not dissipate for a long time. Chapter 881. The scene of Ao Wushuang resolutely turning into a stone shocked everyone on the side peak of Mount Longhu. Some female disciples of the Zhengyi school couldn't help but turn their heads and wipe their tears. Zhang Lufang was young and didn't know much about love, but when she saw Ao Wushuang turn into a big stone, she couldn't help but cry. You almost there. Zhang Kongyun had always hated Ao Wushuang. He thought that she had bewitched Wang Yuanshan and harmed him. But at this time, seeing that Ao Wushuang had almost turned herself into a stone for love, even though he was stubborn, he couldn't help but sigh at this time. What an infatuated fox spirit. Su Chan couldn't take the blow and fainted in Li Yundong's arms. Li Yundong hugged Su Chan lovingly. His chest was wet from crying. He sighed softly, not knowing what to say. Zhang Ling hadn't expected that Ao Wushuang would be so infatuated. She turned her head and looked at Li Yundong helplessly, saying, Leader Li this. Li Yundong waved his hand with a heavy heart and said, Things have come to this. There's no need to say anything else. I hope that your sect will treat our Fox Zen School's predecessor, Ao Wushuang. I will be deeply touched by the stone body she has turned into. She turned around and said loudly to the disciples of the Zhengyi school, From now on, this mountain will never be open to the public. This place will be listed as the forbidden area of Mount Longhu of the Zhengyi school. No disciple of the Zhengyi school is allowed to step into this mountain without permission, and no one is allowed to touch the stone body of Ao Wushuang. Do you understand? The disciples of the Zhengyi school were all moved by Ao Wushuang's infatuation and loyalty. They were awestruck and agreed in unison. Li Yundong bowed slightly to Zhang Ling and the disciples of Zhengyi school and thanked them. On behalf of Su Chan and the Fox Zen school, I would like to thank you all. As he said this, he held the little girl tightly in his arms, turned around, and walked down the mountain. But after a few steps, he turned around again, looked at the people of the Zhengyi school, and said, Since ancient times, although humans and demons have not been the same kind, it has been extremely difficult for them to coexist. But think about it, why can't we tolerate the existence of a different kind around us? What did Ao Wushuang do wrong? Who did she hurt? Was it wrong for her to pursue her own happiness and love? If this is also wrong, then why have we eulogized Zhuo Wenjun and praised Zhu Yingtai for thousands of years? Even Bai Suzhen is the target of our praise. But if the common people can accept a snake demon, then why can't we accept a fox demon? Li Yundong said with a pained expression, You are all reasonable cultivators. I am deeply sad about what happened today. I hope that nothing like this will happen again in the future. Li Yundong's words made everyone's eyes flicker thoughtfully. Zi Yuan and Zhou Qin looked at Li Yundong in a daze. Their hearts were surging, and no one knew what they were thinking. Almost there, after Li Yundong bowed to the people of the Zhengyi school one last time, he turned around and went down the mountain with the unconscious Su Chan in his arms, leaving the people of the Zhengyi school sighing. When Li Yundong and the others returned from Japan, they went straight to Mount Longhu because they were worried about Ao Wushuang's safety. At this time, when they returned home in Tiannan City, as soon as they entered the door, they saw the little foxes sitting on the sand or carpet in the living room, their heads drooping like frosted eggplants. Some looked sad, while others were gently wiping tears. Only Wan Hongling and Lin Miao, who were standing to one side, saw Li Yundong and the others. They immediately beamed with joy and quickly greeted them. Wan Hongling was a little excited and asked Zi Yuan, Shiji Zi Yuan, you're back? How is it? As she said this, her eyes fell on Su Chan and she immediately asked nervously, What's wrong with Su Chan? Is she injured? Where is she? Is it serious? Zi Yuan smiled at her but didn't say anything. She just looked at the little foxes in the living room and asked with her eyes, What happened? Wan Hongling glanced at Li Yundong and said in a low voice, You can ask them yourself. Li Yundong saw that the little foxes were all crying, completely unlike their usual clever and lively selves. After being stunned for a moment, he thought to himself, Do they know about Ao Wushuang? The news spread so fast? He asked, "What's wrong with you? Do you know what happened to Ao Wushuang?" At this moment, Ling Yu raised her head. Her eyes were red and swollen from crying. She wiped her eyes and choked, "Sect Master, Sixth Martial Uncle and the rest. As she spoke, she began to choke with sobs. "You almost there?" Li Yundong was shocked. "What happened to Chao Yi and Lu Yuehong? Did something happen to them too?" Ling Yu was stunned. She let out a cho sound and said with teary eyes, "Also? What do you mean by that?" Li Yundong frowned and said in a low voice, "What happened? Don't cry yet." "Well, I won't cry, I won't cry." But as Ling Yu spoke, she wiped her tears with her hand. She pursed her lips and couldn't help crying again, but it seemed that the more she wiped, the more tears flowed. "Sixth Martial Uncle and the rest don't want us anymore." As soon as she finished speaking, the little foxes burst into tears. For a moment, the living room was filled with the sound of crying, and the atmosphere was gloomy, as if a mourning hall was being held. Even though Li Yundong's cultivation was high, he was still a little flustered by the crying. Li Yundong couldn't help but ask, "They don't want you anymore? What's going on?" At this time, a little fox next to him handed over a piece of paper while crying. Li Yundong took it and saw a few lines of beautiful words written on it. It was a letter of farewell written by Chao Yi. Li Yundong took a closer look and saw that it said, "Hello, Sect Master. By the time you read this letter, Senior Sister Lu Yuehong and I will have completely left the Fox Zen School and left you. I believe that now the Sect Master already knows the reason for our departure, so this farewell is very sudden. However, we are too ashamed to face the Sect Master again, and we don't even have the courage to apologize to him in person. These days, Sect Leader, you have treated us well. We are not stone people with hearts of stone. How could we not be touched? We understand. However, the former Sect Leader, Lu Yi, has raised and taught us, and the Sect Leader has protected us. Therefore, Senior Sister and I have been suffering in the middle. Every day is like a year, and we can't sleep at night. The plan of the Fox Zen School has nothing to do with us, but we have been deeply indebted to Lu Yi for raising us. We have to repay him, but we also feel ashamed to face the Sect Master, so we have to say goodbye and leave in a dilemma. However, Xueqi and I are the ones to blame for all this. Su Chan, Ling Yu, and the others don't know anything. I hope the Sect Master won't blame them. As the saying goes, ignorance is not a crime. If they leave the Sect Master, they will be like rootless duckweed without a source. Although the world is big, there is no place for them. Xueqi and I have looked around the cultivation world today. Only the Sect Master is broad-minded and has a profound cultivation quotient, which is enough to protect them from the secular world. We hope that the Sect Master will be merciful and not abandon them. When Li Yundong saw this, he couldn't help but raise his head and sigh. He said in a low voice of reproach, "Nonsense, it's really nonsense." The little foxes next to him looked at Li Yundong timidly, but they didn't know whether he was talking about them or Chao Yi and Lu Yuehong. The little foxes were very familiar with Li Yundong, so they were really afraid that he would leave them behind. If that happened, they really didn't know where to go. Zi Yuan and Zhou Qin couldn't help but curiously poke their heads over to take a look. After that, they looked at each other in dismay. After exchanging glances, they both retreated to the side and kept their mouths shut. Li Yundong looked around and saw that the little foxes were all looking at him. Their timid looks could even soften an Iron Man's heart. He was also a person who was extremely protective of women, so he couldn't help but sigh and say, "Why are you all looking at me like this? Are you afraid that I'll leave you behind too?" Although the little foxes had suddenly changed and were a little confused, they were still very clever. Ling Yu immediately took Li Yundong's arm and said with an aggrieved expression, "Sect Master, you can't leave us alone. If you don't care about us, we will become unwanted children." As she said this, the little foxes couldn't help but cry one by one. Li Yundong felt a little headache from crying. He sighed again and said, "How old are you? You're still children. Don't cry, don't cry. Did I say that I would leave you alone? You think I'm too ruthless, don't you?" The little foxes were stunned, and then they blurted out at the same time, "Really?" Li Yundong sighed and said, "Of course. When have I ever lied to you?" The little foxes immediately burst into laughter and cheered in unison. One by one, they squeezed in front of Li Yundong to hug him. At this time, Li Yundong was still holding Su Chan in his arms. Surrounded by the little foxes, he was almost drowned in the crowd. Zhou Qin and Zi Yuan couldn't help but look at each other again and sigh in their hearts. The two of them sighed that Li Yundong was good in all aspects, but he was too protective of women and had an extremely good relationship with them. In addition, they sighed, with so many little foxes, how could he establish a sect in the future? This was really worrying. After Li Yundong comforted the little foxes, he told them about Ao Wushuang. But as soon as he finished speaking, the little foxes burst into tears one by one. Little Shu Wushuang doesn't want us anymore. Li Yundong saw that they had finally stopped crying, but at this time, they were crying again. This time, he didn't know how to persuade them. He just winked at Zi Yuan, Zhou Qin, Ruan Hongling, and Lin Miao. Then he went into the room and put Su Chan, who had fallen asleep from crying, on the bed. After covering her with the quilt, he gently retreated. Li Yundong took Zi Yuan and the others to the opposite door. The little fox's crying was blocked by several walls, and they suddenly became much lighter. Li Yundong also breathed a sigh of relief. He said to Zi Yuan, "Now the outside world knows that we have defeated the mystical silver fox. But in fact, we have our own difficulties. The mystical silver fox is now hiding in the purple gold luo pan. If we go in rashly, she may defeat us one by one. But if the mystical silver fox doesn't come out, I can't think of any good way. Zi Yuan, you have seen a lot. Do you have any good ideas?" Zi Yuan thought for a moment and said hesitantly, "There is a way." Li Yundong's eyes lit up and he said, "Tell me." Chapter 882. Please go to ****** read latest chapter / she said. "In fact, it's not a good idea. The mystical silver fox is in the purple gold luo pan. We can't go in for a while, and she can't come out for a while. So I think you might as well take advantage of this period of time to quickly increase your spiritual power cultivation. It's best to find your own Wisdom King's Dharmakaya, so that you can fight with the mystical silver fox fair and square. Even if it's one-on-one, you won't be at a disadvantage. And if we go in with you at this time, the mystical silver fox will definitely be defeated." Li Yunyang asked curiously, "Wisdom King's Dharmakaya? Then where is my Wisdom King Dharmakaya?" Zi Yuan hesitated for a moment and said, "The immovable Wisdom King is the head of the 5 Wisdom Kings of the esoteric sect. If you want to find your Wisdom King's Dharmakaya, you must look for it in the esoteric sect's cultivation place." Li Yunyang frowned slightly and said, "Look for it in the cultivation place of the esoteric sect?" However, the esoteric sect of the Chinese cultivation world had already moved eastward to Japan during the Tang dynasty. Now, the esoteric sect is referring to the Tibetan esoteric sect. Could it be that my Dharmakaya of the Wisdom King is in Tibet? No way. Why didn't Master Erdini tell me when I went to Tibet last time? Zi Yuan shook her head and said, "All the gods in the world have a habit, that is, they tend to favor places with devout believers and strong incense. Only in these places can there be many miracles." At this moment, Lin Miao let out a soft cry and said, "No wonder I heard that people fight for their dignity and Buddhas fight for their incense. So this is the reason?" Li Yunyang looked at her with a smile and nodded approvingly. "That's right. Don't think that the gods are indifferent to fame and fortune. In fact, the gods also fight very fiercely in the sky. There are many stories of gods fighting with each other in your Western mythology, aren't there?" Lin Miao said seriously, "Master, now there is only Lin Miao from the east, there is no Chris from the west." Li Yundong chuckled. "Well, it's my fault. However, there are many things worth learning from Westernization. We shouldn't blindly reject it. We should take its essence." Lin Miao said seriously, "Master, I think that if you really want to cultivate, you have to give up everything in the past. Forget your race, skin, and nationality. Only then can you truly integrate into this environment. Otherwise, you might just be a layman walking around outside for the rest of your life." As she said this, she looked at Li Yundong with great admiration and said very sincerely, "I hope that one day in my life, even if it's just an hour or a minute, I can experience the highest realm of cultivation that my master once experienced. I want to know what it feels like and what it tastes like." Li Yundong disagreed with Lin Miao's previous words. He had always disagreed with the idea and practice of neither left nor right, neither east nor west. For example, in order to smash the decadent feudal dynasty in the past, people had completely destroyed everything in the feudal society. Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism had been completely destroyed at that time. Especially Confucianism. People had abandoned Confucianism like a pair of worn-out shoes and smashed it with contempt. However, Southeast Asian countries, such as Vietnam, regarded it as a treasure. Now they were still based on Confucianism, and Confucius statues could be seen everywhere in universities. This kind of black-and-white thinking was very active. Li Yundong didn't appreciate it, but he also knew that Lin Miao's diligent and devout cultivation heart was quite rare. He shouldn't destroy her enthusiasm, so he just smiled and nodded at her to show his approval. Then, Li Yundong turned his head and said to Zi Yuan, "Just now, according to what you said, isn't the most popular place in the world the Shingon Tantrism in Mount Koya in Japan? If it were more than 1,000 years ago, Japan would not be ranked even if they queued 800 times. At that time, the Tang dynasty was the most prosperous place in the world for Tantrism. Even India, the motherland of Buddhism, could not compare with China. But now, there were nearly 100 million Buddhists in Japan. Although India and other countries also believed in Buddhism, there were probably hundreds of millions of Buddhists. However, there were too many Buddhist schools in India, and there were also many gods. On weekdays, when Hindus went to the toilet, there were many special toilet gods and Buddhas. If they worshipped the gods and Buddhas in front of the toilet one by one before entering, they would probably wet their pants several times. It could be seen that there were as many gods and Buddhas in this country as there were people in India. If there were too many gods, the incense would be easily dispersed. What's more, once there were too many schools, the attacks between them would be very fierce. The gods between schools were different. The gods believed in one school were not believed in another school. Therefore, the believers were clearly divided. Those who believed in one school would definitely not believe in the gods of another school. Therefore, although the immovable Wisdom King had a high status, he could not resist the gods and there were too many temples. He could only watch helplessly as his incense was divided by the gods and Buddhas everywhere. However, Buddhism in Japan was different. Although there were different schools in this country, because of the sensitive relationship between Shintoism and Buddhism in this country, many believers of Buddhism were also believers of Shintoism. Similarly, when they believed in Amaterasu at the same time, they did not exclude the gods and Buddhas of other schools. The Japanese people advocated martial arts, and their respect for the immovable Wisdom King had almost become a special culture. It could even be said that almost all Buddhists in Japan highly respected and believed in the immovable Wisdom King, not only the Shingon Tantrism. Therefore, according to Zi Yuan, the immovable Wisdom King's Dharmakaya could only be in the Shingon Tantrism, because Mount Koya of the Shingon Tantrism was the exclusive Taoist field of the immovable Wisdom King. Seeing Li Yundong ask her, Zi Yuan said cautiously, "I'm just speculating. I'm not completely sure. I'm afraid I'll have to go to Mount Koya to know whether it's true or not." Li Yundong couldn't help frowning when he heard this. "I just came back from Japan, and now I'm going there again? No way." Zi Yuan pursed her lips and smiled. "Now that your young spirit comes and goes, you can fly several times a day. Is there any difficulty?" However, Li Yundong shook his head and said, "The Japanese cultivation world has suffered heavy losses in this war. People like me, who don't like little Japan, feel miserable when I see it. I'm afraid that they are doing a big thing at this time, and they may be saying bad things about me behind my back. If I go, it won't be a good thing." At this time, Xueqi couldn't help but sneer and say, "How dare they? Don't they see if they can survive without master?" Li Yundong smiled and said, "You can't say that. In this world, only kindness that doesn't ask for anything in return is true kindness. Sometimes, not only will you not get anything in return, but you may even have an enemy." Ruan Hongling, who had been silent all this time, couldn't help but ask curiously, "What's the meaning of this?" She was straightforward and shallow, so she couldn't understand the truth of these words. However, after hearing this, Xueqi was stunned. Her eyes flashed and she seemed to be thinking about something. Li Yundong smiled and said to Ruan Hongling, "When you grow up a little more, you will understand." As he said this, he said to Zi Yuan, "Let's put this matter aside for now. At least wait until Su Chan wakes up. In addition, we should find a way to find Chao Yi and Lu Yuehong in the next few days. The two of them are fox demons. I'm afraid that if they wander outside, they will cause a lot of trouble." Zi Yuan nodded, but Xueqi quickly said, Master, do you think they went to find Lu Yi? On the way back, Li Yundong had also told Zhou and the others about his doubts about whether Lu Yi was dead or not. At this time, when Zhou said this, he suddenly thought of this and said, "It's very possible." Zhou was greatly encouraged and said, "Master, where do you think they will go to find him?" Li Yundong, Zhou and Zi Yuan looked at each other, and the three of them said in unison, "Mount Tianlong." After the three of them finished speaking, they looked at each other and smiled. After thinking for a moment, Li Yundong said, "Well, I'll go to Mount Tianlong. You guys stay at home." Zhou volunteered and said, "Master, I'll go with you." At this time, Lin Miao also said, "Master, there shouldn't be any danger this time. Can you take me to have a look?" Seeing the anticipation on their faces, Li Yundong nodded and smiled helplessly at Zi Yuan. "I'm sorry to trouble you to look after the house." Zi Yuan also smiled and said, "It's okay. Now the mystical silver fox has been locked in the purple gold luo disc. If there are no outsiders, she won't be able to get out in a short time." As soon as he said this, Li Yundong suddenly thought of something and immediately said, "You reminded me. No, I have to carry this purple gold luo disc with me. I can't leave it with you. Otherwise, it will hurt you." Zi Yuan smiled slightly and said, "Take it. I don't dare to take it even if you give it to me. Otherwise, what if the mystical silver fox suddenly runs out when you are not here?" Although this was a joke, Li Yundong was shocked when he heard it. He said, "It's okay if you don't say it. I also feel a little scared when you say it. Forget it, you can go with us. Otherwise, when Su Chan wakes up, we can go together. That's okay, isn't it?" Li Yundong was now at the highest realm of the Thunder Retribution, only one step away from the first heaven. Su Chan, Zi Yuan, and Zhou were all masters of the Thunder Retribution realm. If the four of them worked together, although the world was big, they could really go anywhere. Even if it was a dragon's pool or a tiger's cave, they would still have the strength to break through. Just as Li Yundong and the others were about to return to Mount Tianlong, in distant Japan, although a fierce battle in the cultivation world had ended, a huge earthquake caused by this fierce battle swept over quickly, shaking the entire Japanese cultivation world and even the whole country. Don't worry that this book will end immediately. There is still a very interesting story to follow, / uploaded by bookfriends / Chapter 883. Wakayama Prefecture, Japan, in the Okinawan, which was full of trees and tombstones. A beautiful woman in a plain kimono was kneeling on the tatami. She was wearing a pair of white cotton socks, her back was straight, her head was coiled high, and her hair was combed into a noble bun. Although her whole body was very simple, her whole temperament seemed noble and extraordinary. This person was Masako Tachibana, the former patriarch of the Tachibana family, who had once dominated Japan and was invincible. Masako Tachibana was defeated by Li Yundong at the peak of the cultivation world and fell from the Mount Tianwang. After a short period of pain and torture, she gradually learned from the pain and walked out of the shadow of failure. At this time, she had shed all her glory. Although she was bare-faced and did not have the dignity of the past, she had a different kind of charm. Masako Tachibana was kneeling in a small courtyard of the Okinawan. There was a tea table in front of her. While making tea and pouring tea for herself, she was watching the picture on the TV not far away and listening to the sound coming from it. At this time, the TV was playing the TV news of the Takagi Prefecture TV station with the icon GY. In it, a beautiful but tired female host was saying very quickly and clearly, "Yesterday at about 11 o'clock in the morning, there was another strong earthquake in Japan, with Nazuno in Takagi Prefecture as the epicenter. The surrounding places such as Fujiwara Town, Nishinasuno Town, and Kuroshin Village all had obvious tremors. According to the preliminary estimate of the Earthquake Monitoring Center, the intensity of this earthquake is about 6. The surrounding cities are not very seriously affected, but because Nazuno is now in a state of high alert, it is strange that the area near the epicenter has been closed by the local police and self-defense forces." At this time, the host in the TV was standing on a mountain and pointing to the location of the Killing Stone scenic area. She said in a suspicious and exaggerated tone, "When I arrived here, I found that there were many monks and Shintoist priests, sorcerers, goddesses and witches here. At this time, They were setting up Taoist rites in the west and west of the epicenter and offering sacrifices to the dead. What is incomprehensible is that in this earthquake, many monks and cultivators of the Shintoism sect died. Of course, that's not the most incredible thing. The most incredible thing is that we can actually see all the major sects of Shintoism gathered here. How rare! Nothing like this has ever happened before. What kind of matter could make so many sects gather together? As she said that, the host suddenly pressed her hand against the headset in her ear, as if she had heard the instructions and words from the director. She listened to the words in the headset while nodding. After a while, she continued, "We just received news that the residents nearby have seen many incredible phenomena. These phenomena occurred at the same time as the earthquake, which is very surprising. Now our staff has found a resident nearby and asked us to ask her what happened here." At this time, she took a few quick steps, and the camera followed her figure. She came to an old woman with wrinkles all over her face. The female reporter bowed and said loudly, "Oh, I'm sorry to disturb you." The old Nai also bowed in return and put his palms together. "You're welcome." The female reporter asked curiously, "Old Nai, are you a Buddhist?" The old Nai laughed and said, "Yes, I've been a vegetarian for 60 years. The female reporter said with an exaggerated expression, "Wow, you're really a devout Buddhist. By the way, during the earthquake yesterday, I heard that something very strange happened here. Did you see it, old Nai?" The old Nai's expression suddenly became very rich, and he said in an exaggerated tone, "Oh, you're talking about this. I saw it with my own eyes." The female reporter hurriedly asked, "What happened?" The old Nai pointed in the direction of the Stone of Slaughter scenic area and the continuous mountain range and said, "When the earthquake happened yesterday, there were rolling thunderclouds everywhere in the sky at the beginning. The thunder was so loud that it sounded like the end of the earth was coming. It was really scary. All the residents nearby ran away and didn't dare to stay at home. I really couldn't walk, so I didn't leave. But then I saw the sky was full of colorful lights, and there were a lot of people flying around in the air." As he said that, the old Nai's expression suddenly became very mysterious. "Do you know what else I saw?" The female reporter was listening with great interest at first, but when she heard that there were a lot of people flying around in the air, her expression became very interesting. She already felt that the old man was very unreliable, but she still asked, "What did you see?" The old Nai suddenly waved his hands vigorously. "It's the nine-tailed celestial fox. It's the Yumai. I saw the Yumai that was released from the Stone of Slaughter." The female reporter didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Although she was also a follower of the Ise Shinto of Shintoism, the degree of her faith was very shallow. She only went to worship during festivals, and it was absolutely not the word devout. Moreover, she was born in a good family and received a good Western education. Naturally, she wouldn't believe in such outrageous things. If it wasn't for politeness and professionalism, she was afraid that she would have asked the old man, "Are you a shill for the Stone of Slaughter?" and so on. At this time, the old Nai's emotions were stirred up, and he couldn't control himself. He danced on the spot, like a witch, and muttered some incantations. But after all, he was old. After tossing and turning for a while, his body slanted, and he fell to the side, scaring the female reporter to the side. She immediately supported the old Nai, and shouted loudly, "Help! Help!" Previously, in order to get the camera position and angle, the place she was at was rather remote. When she shouted, no one responded to her. When the female reporter was busy, she saw a figure flash in the mountains. She immediately shouted, "Is there someone there? Come help, there's someone here who can't hold on any longer." At this time, the figure hesitated, and then walked out from the forest. It was a young woman with a graceful figure. Her head was lowered, and she looked somewhat flustered and hesitant not far away. When she saw the camera, she didn't want to come over. When the female reporter saw this, she became anxious, and shouted loudly at the woman, "What are you doing there? Come quickly." At this time, the woman seemed to have made up her mind. She covered her face and ran over. The female reporter didn't pay attention to her, but the cameraman was curious, and stared at the woman with the camera. The two of them hurriedly stuffed a purse into the old man's mouth. Only then did they heave a sigh of relief. The female reporter raised her eyes and carefully looked at the woman in front of her. Out of habit she asked, "Do you live nearby?" Did you see anything strange yesterday? She rambled on, but the woman didn't seem to understand. She waved her hand and turned to leave, still covering her face with her hand. At this time, the female reporter came to her senses. She felt that she looked like a star she knew, so she pointed at her and said, "Ah, you seem to be a movie star in China?" However, the woman waved her hand and didn't say a word. She quickly ran away from the TV camera with a frightened expression. The female reporter watched her go away. She wanted to chase after her, but she couldn't leave the old man beside her alone. She could only stamp her feet secretly. She could vaguely guess the woman's identity, but she didn't understand why such a popular star in China would appear in this place alone. However, she didn't know that this person was none other than Lu Fei-er. After the mystical silver fox rushed out alone, Lu Fei-er looked at the sky with fear, waiting for the result of the battle of the century. Later, she was really frightened by the scene and movement of the battle. The deafening explosion and roar made her feel as if she was on a battlefield, as if she would be involved in the disaster in the next second and be smashed to pieces. Although Lu Fei-er was afraid, she was a young woman after all, and her hands and feet were nimble. She boldly ran out and hid far away. She didn't even dare to look at the terrible battle in the sky. When the world quieted down again, she poked her head out in panic. She wanted to know the result, but she didn't dare to go back to the original hotel. She only dared to stay alone. She didn't have a phone. She stayed alone for a day with hunger and cold. After making sure that the mystical silver fox didn't appear again, and there were more and more people around, she boldly walked out. However, she didn't expect that she would encounter such a thing as soon as she escaped. Her identity was sensitive, and if she was caught, it would definitely be a piece of gossip. Who knew how it would be made up, so naturally, she ran as fast as she could. At this time, the female reporter's eyes and the TV camera were drawn back from Lu Fei-er, who had gone far away. The female reporter continued to go deep into the scene of the Killing Stone scenic spot with the cameraman. While filming the scene of the destruction caused by the battle, she did the interview. Masako Tachibana, who was next to the TV, was silent for a while, and there was no expression on her face. After a while, the moving door of the room was gently opened, and a beautiful woman came in. It was Tsuruko Tachibana. After she opened the door, she saw her daughter at a glance. She was slightly surprised, and then she said with a smile, "Tsuruko, are you up? Are you watching the news?" "Ah, it's the news about Xueqi. Ah, so many people died at that time." Masako Tachibana turned her face slightly and sighed softly. "Yes, it's terrible. Is our Japanese cultivation world really so vulnerable? Are the Chinese cultivators really so much stronger than us?" Tsuruko Tachibana smiled slightly. After dragging his wooden clogs at the door, he moved in snow-white socks and walked to his daughter's side. Then he knelt down and said softly, "When I was the same age as you, I once thought that I was the strongest, that the sect I believed in was the strongest, and that the gods I believed in were the strongest. But when I met Wang Yuanshan, I knew that it was not like that." Tsuruko Tachibana looked at his daughter seriously and said, "Tsuruko, although you have experienced this fiasco, it is not a bad thing. When I was defeated by Wang Yuanshan, I was no better than you. Failure is not terrible. What is terrible is that you do not know how to sum up the experience and lessons in the failure and catch up with the strong. Since you are so emotional today, let me take the liberty to ask you, have you learned any lessons from it?" Tsuruko Tachibana's face was wooden and she did not speak for a long time. After a long time, she said slowly, "Mother, I want to send Tachibana Wakako to China for further cultivation." Tsuruko Tachibana immediately laughed. She knew that her daughter had realized the problem. She quickly asked, "Then who do you want her to worship as a teacher?" Masako Tachibana said with a solemn face, "Where you fall, of course, you have to get up. Of course, it is to worship Li Yundong, the fighting Tianzuan, as a teacher. I'm too tired. There's only one chapter tonight. I'll make up for it tomorrow morning." Chapter 884. When Tsuruko Tachibana heard what Masako Tachibana said, he smiled with relief and said, "Masako, have you asked the child? Will she be willing to go?" Although Masako Tachibana was a woman, she had a strong Japanese style of parental control. She never considered everything from the perspective of her children, so she didn't want to go. "You soon. Masako Tachibana said disapprovingly. She has to go whether she wants to or not. Just as Tsuruko Tachibana was about to speak, he suddenly heard a voice coming from outside. No, I don't want to go. The two of them were stunned. They looked back and saw that Tachibana Wakako was standing at the door, looking at her mother indignantly. When she saw her mother and Nai looking at her, she shouted again, I don't want to go. Then she turned around and ran away. Tsuruko Tachibana and Masako Tachibana didn't expect that Tachibana Wakako would be next to them at this time, and they happened to hear this. They looked at each other. Tsuruko Tachibana couldn't help complaining. Masako, you shouldn't force her. Masako Tachibana snorted and said stubbornly, I'm doing this for her own good. Tsuruko Tachibana sighed and said, Of course, parents think so, but the child is already an adult now. She has her own ideas, and we should respect her opinion. Masako Tachibana was anxious. Do you want me to worship Li Jiandong as my teacher? Tsuruko Tachibana looked at her strangely. Why not? Masako Tachibana's face darkened and she said with a long face, I can't do that. Tsuruko Tachibana said with a smile. There is no age in learning. The capable one is the teacher. It seems that although you have made progress, you still haven't seen through it. The stubborn Masako Tachibana asked, Mother, if it were you, would you like to worship Wang Yuanshan, who defeated you that year, as your teacher? This sentence suddenly made Tsuruko Tachibana look sad. She was silent. After a long time, she sighed and said a Chinese poem in a low voice. My heart will shine on the bright moon, but the bright moon shines on the ditch. The goddess is interested. This poem came from Daji's deep love for Jibokeo in the gods' investiture list. After being rejected by Jibokeo, she lamented. The Tachibana family was the most influential family among the 4 noble surnames in Japan. As the heir of the Tachibana family, Masako Tachibana was a noble among the nobles in Japan. People like her had been reading poetry and books since she was a child. She had learned ancient and modern knowledge, Chinese and Western knowledge, including zither, chess, calligraphy and painting, tea poetry, sword dance, and so on. The Chinese found it a little difficult to read the Book of Songs, records of the Grand Historian, and other pure classical Chinese books. In their eyes, those were the classics that they had to read since they were 5 years old. They could read through them easily, and it was as easy as reading Story Club. Tsuruko Tachibana's poem was about the story that Daji had wanted the handsome and beautiful Jibokeo to be his teacher, but he had been sternly rejected. When Masako Tachibana heard this, she immediately understood the meaning of the song. She said apologetically, Mother, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to mention your sadness. Masako Tachibana knew that after her mother returned from Zhonghua University, she fell in love and didn't care about the internal affairs of the family. She threw all the heavy burdens to her. At that time, she was only a teenager, but she had taken up the family's pillar and fought with others with countless methods. Other Japanese girls of her age were in the prime of their youth, enjoying themselves to their heart's content, while she had to constantly battle wits and courage with others in the cold and strict cultivation world. It was in such an environment that Masako Tachibana had honed her heart of stone. When Tsuruko Tachibana heard his daughter's apology, he shook his head slightly, put his palms together, and murmured softly, I hope Amaterasu God will bless Wang Yuanshan and let him be safe. Masako Tachibana opened her mouth and thought to herself, the 9th heaven divine night thunder almost killed the mystical silver fox, let alone Wang Yuanshan? How could he still be alive? But she still held back her words and didn't say anything more. Her eyes flickered, thinking about how to make her daughter yield and finally be willing to take Li Jiandong as her teacher. Here it is because Masako Tachibana had been the head of the family since she was a teenager. The innocence and brilliance of the girl had all been worn out in the cruel sect struggle, leaving only iron blood and coldness. At this time, after thinking about the pain and becoming a lot calmer, she still had a deep style of a parent. She absolutely could not tolerate the slightest resistance and conflict between her children and her subordinates. She had very little communication with her daughter, and she didn't know that her daughter actually admired and worshipped Li Jiandong very much. Moreover, even if Tachibana Wakako had once cried, she didn't take it seriously. If she had told her in a good voice, Tachibana Wakako would have been so excited that she would have jumped 3 feet high. Without her saying anything more, she would have agreed happily. But when Masako Tachibana said these words in such a tough manner, it immediately aroused Tachibana Wakako's disgust. Although she was usually gentle and pleasant, She was also at the age where her rebellious heart was the strongest. Hearing her mother's words, her rebellious heart rose, and she refused to do what she had been willing to do. At this time, Masako Tachibana didn't have the slightest intention of repentance. She was only thinking about how to make her daughter give in, but she didn't expect that it would cause a lot of trouble. Almost at the same time, in Mount Tianlong of Dongwu City, Li Jiandong and the others revisited the old place again. But they were quite disappointed to find that there were no traces of Chao Yi, Lu Yuehong, and the others in the old place of the Fox Zen School. Li Jiandong pushed open the door and walked into the Taoist temple that had made him famous all over the world. He saw that there were fewer visitors in the Taoist temple because of the lack of management. Dongwu City was a famous cultural tourist city in China. The Taoist field on Mount Tianlong was not very famous. In Buddhism, there were Shiyuan Temple, which was more famous than it, the Cold Mountain Temple, which was known as the Midnight Bell to the passenger ship, and the North Temple Pagoda, which was known as the First Temple of Dongwu. In Taoism, there was the Xuanmiao Temple, which was one of the 4 famous temples in Jiangnan. These places naturally had a greater advantage than Mount Tianlong. In addition, since the 6 sects besieged the Fox Zen School, the Taoist temple of Mount Tianlong had been in a state of no management and was basically abandoned. Although there had been a lively scene of a lot of tourists for a period of time, it was in the tourist season. Now it was the off-season. The Taoist temple of Mount Tianlong was really deserted. The whole mountain was quiet, and the birds were singing even louder. There was only the sound of birds singing everywhere, but there was no sound of people. This made Li Jiandong feel very emotional for a moment. He walked to the Taoist temple with the pattern of 8 diagrams and yin-yang. This was the place where he had fought against the masters of the 6 sects and defeated their plot of taking turns to fight. For a moment, Li Jiandong couldn't help thinking of the scene of the fierce fight. Now that he thought about it, although he felt that the fight at that time was a little childish, he couldn't help but feel emotional when he revisited the old place. Especially when he pushed open the door to the place where Lu Yi used to live. He saw that the desk, the chair, and even the door were covered with dust and cobwebs. There was no trace of anyone having been there. After looking around the room, Li Jiandong couldn't help but shake his head. It seems that he's not here. At this time, Zi Yuan and Zhou Qin carefully looked around and nodded in agreement with Li Jiandong. Lin Miao, who had followed them, looked around curiously and asked Wan Hongling about what had happened to Li Jiandong here from time to time in a low voice. When she woke up, she was still crying and fainting because of the bad news of Ao Wushuang. She, who was usually talkative, had become silent and ignored everyone who talked to her. Only when Li Jiandong talked to her did she hold Li Jiandong's arm tightly and cry silently. After Li Jiandong gently and carefully coaxed her for a long time, she slowly stopped crying, but she refused to let go of Li Jiandong's hand no matter what. This time, even if Li Yundong hadn't asked her to come to Dongwu City, she was afraid that she would have refused. Now in the little girl's mind, she was already alone. She had neither relatives nor a master. She only had Li Yundong to rely on. If he disappeared again, there would be no meaning in her life. Li Jiandong turned his head to look at Su Chan, only to see that she had lowered her head and her eyes were slightly red. It seemed that she had remembered the past when she had fought with her master, Ao Wushuang here. For a moment, she felt sad and wanted to cry again. He smiled and persuaded her. "Chaner, do you still remember when we were at our poorest? We were looking through our bank books here, but we found that there was no money in them." Li Jiandong mentioned these painful past events, but looking back, it made people feel warm and interesting. Hearing his words, the little girl's attention was distracted. She remembered that she and Li Jiandong had destroyed the treasures of the Fox Zen School for thousands of years in the secret room. She was so scared that she had destroyed the corpses to get rid of the evidence. Thinking of these things, the little girl's sadness was immediately diluted a lot. The corners of her mouth curved slightly. She said softly, "Yundong, do you think they are in the secret room?" Li Jiandong was stunned and said, "It's possible." As he said this, he immediately led Su Chan and the others into the secret room through the entrance of the back mountain. But after entering the secret room, Li Jiandong still found no trace of them. There was thick dust and dense cobwebs everywhere. Li Jiandong shook his head and said, "They're not here. Since we can think of it, they can also think of it. If Lu Yi is still alive, he will definitely think of it." Su Chan thought for a moment and said, "Then, could they be in Shantang?" Although Li Jiandong didn't think that Xueqi and Lu Yuehong would show up here, when he saw Su Chan looking up at him eagerly, he remembered the warm scene when he had reunited with her in Shantang. He wanted the little girl to not be so sad, so he said to her, "Okay, let's go and have a look." Although Li Jiandong didn't have any hope, when they arrived at Shantang, Li Jiandong pulled up the copper ring of a wooden door of a house that he was very familiar with and gently knocked on it. After a while, there was the sound of hurried footsteps coming from inside the wooden door. With a creak, the door was opened, and a beautiful woman came out. It was Main Yang. I went out early this morning to buy a gift for my father-in-law. I had to go back to my parents' home on National Day, so I was late. Sorry. Chapter 885. The last time Li Yundong had seen Main Yang was on Mount Gazao. However, after they met face to face, no one could see each other clearly in the darkness. They could only hear their voices, but not see each other. But at this time when they suddenly met, both of them were stunned, as if they hadn't expected to see each other here. Main Yang looked at Li Yundong in surprise, but soon she smiled sweetly and said, "It's you. Long time no see. You're more handsome than before." Li Yundong looked at the woman in front of him, who had once been reduced to prostitution, and said with some emotion, "You too. When we were on Mount Tianlong, I thought you were dead." Main Yang smiled slightly and said, "Some people are alive, but they are already dead. Some people are dead, but they are still alive. Who knows whether they are alive or dead?" This sentence was full of deep meaning. Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat when he heard it, and he said meaningfully, "Has Lu Yi come back?" Main Yang smiled. Her smile was a little sad. "You're not the first to ask." Li Yundong said curiously, "Someone else has come to ask." Main Yang sighed softly and said, "People like him don't seem to know about his existence when he is fine. But when something happens, it seems that the whole world is his enemy. Many people have come to inquire about it. Do you want to come in and search? Anyway, if I don't let you in, you will still force your way in." As she said this, she stepped aside and crossed her arms in front of her chest. She squinted and raised her eyebrows, looking at Li Yundong with a hint of provocation. Li Yundong frowned and said, "Has anyone broken in?" Main Yang giggled and said, "Why? If I tell you, will you uphold justice for a weak girl like me?" Li Yundong suddenly fell silent. In the eyes of other sects in the cultivation world, Lu Yi was a scheming devil. The resurrection of the mystical silver fox had caused great damage to the cultivation world. If he could think that Lu Yi might not be dead, other people were not stupid, so they could naturally think of it. Therefore, from their standpoint, Lu Ye's life and death were naturally very important. In order to eliminate this hidden danger, it was normal to use some extreme means, not to mention breaking into a private house. Li Yundong sighed secretly. This was a different standpoint, and their attitudes were completely different. Although he sympathized with Main Yang a little, he could not blatantly uphold the so-called justice for her at this time. Justice was always one-sided. For Lu Yi, resurrecting the mystical silver fox was the most righteous thing, but for other sects in the cultivation world, it was the most evil thing in the world. For many Islamists in the Middle East, the United States was the most evil, and the terrorist activities they carried out were the most righteous holy war. But for Americans and many Westerners, these terrorists were the most evil and they were the righteous side. Since ancient times, the righteousness of one's own side must be the evil of the other side. There was no exception. Li Yundong's silence made Main Yang laugh more and more wantonly. She said with a smile, "It's you who didn't come in and have a look? It's not that I don't want you to come in and have a look, in case you come again next time and frame me, a lonely woman. I can't afford it." Main Yang was born in the dust. She had climbed from a little sister to a technician, and then from a technician to the position of a leader. Along the way, she had climbed in this pit, and had long practiced the ability to coax and pester people. Although the few people who had come before were all cultivators with high cultivation, Main Yang was really desperate. She made a scene, rolled on the ground, and went crazy. They really had a headache, and their faces were dirty. They came arrogantly and left dejectedly. However, after all, Li Yundong could be considered an old acquaintance of Main Yang. Moreover, Li Yundong had a calm temperament that ordinary people did not have. She really could not put on such a rude attitude in front of this boy. Saying a few words that were hidden in silk floss was already her limit. Li Yundong didn't really expect to find Lu Ye's whereabouts here. After he smiled, he said to Mei Nyang, "You think too much. We don't want to embarrass you. If you have any difficulties in the future, you can come to me." Mei Nyang burst into laughter. She raised her eyebrows and looked at the women behind Li Yundong meaningfully. She giggled and said, "You already have so many beautiful women around you. What's wrong? Don't you think it's not enough? Aren't you afraid that you can't handle it? If you don't think I'm a pushover, it's not bad for me to come to you." Li Yundong suddenly remembered his encounter with Mei Nyang in front of the so-called property of the Fox Zen school. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Zi Yuan, who was standing to one side, blushed slightly and looked elsewhere. Ruan Hongling curled her lips and showed a disdainful expression. Zhou Qin's eyes widened, and she was very unhappy with Mei Nyang's frivolous behavior. Li Yundong shook his head with a wry smile and said, "Forget it, I won't disturb you anymore. We'll leave first." Not long after Li Yundong and the others left, a person suddenly came out of the inner room. It was Yu Yutian. Yu Yutian gritted his teeth and looked at Mei Nyang, saying, "Do you know him?" Mei Nyang sighed softly. "Yes, I've had some fun with him." Yu Yutian sneered and said, "It seems that your love for him is not shallow." Mei Nyang could hear the sarcasm in his tone. She raised her eyebrows and said lightly, "If you have any grudges with him, go and find him yourself. I'm just a weak woman. Why are you showing off your power in front of me?" As she spoke, she turned to close the door, making Yu Yutian grit his teeth and his face turn red and blue. Mei Nyang was about to close the door when she suddenly heard a Buddhist chant. "Amitabha, Lady Tan Yu, please take your time to close the door." Mei Nyang was stunned. She saw a kind-looking old monk and several monks behind him coming to the door. Mei Nyang frowned. Before they could speak, she asked coldly, "Are you also looking for Lu Yi?" Li Yundong was handsome and had an outstanding temperament. Mei Nyang had some feelings for him, so she naturally talked to him with a smile. But at this time, an old monk was standing in front of her, so she didn't have a good face. The monk in the lead was none other than Master Purin, the abbot of Shiyuan Temple. Ever since his disciple Wu Hua had predicted the future, he had been keeping an eye on Lu Yi with his men. Although he had seen Lu Ye's head before, Purin was still a little worried. He had come here with his men and taken the initiative to enter the door to see if he could find any flaws. Purin made a palm with one hand and said, "Amitabha, yes and no. We are looking for benefactor Lu Yi, but we are not looking for benefactor Lu Yi." Monks love to talk about Zen, but they also had to see who they were talking to. If these words were said to Li Yundong, they might immediately have an exciting conversation. But if they were said to Mei Nyang, who came from a brothel, it was like casting coquettish glances at a blind person, playing the lute to a cow. Mei Nyang immediately giggled and said, "Master, your words are really profound. I don't understand. However, if you are not looking for Lu Yi, are you looking for me?" As she said this, she cast a coquettish glance at Purin. Purin was already in a state of emptiness, not the slightest bit affected by this beauty, but the disciples around him didn't have such a profound realm. The middle-aged monk Feikong scolded, "You woman, be a bit more dignified." This time, Mei Nyang immediately pulled a long face and sneered, "Be more dignified? You bald donkeys dare to say such things to me? When you first came to my shop, you played with little sister. Not only did you renege on your debt, but you also F*King abducted my red-card little sister and ran away with you. F*CKU. You bald donkeys are usually sanctimonious. I didn't know that you were really good at picking up girls. How dare you say such things to me now?" Mei Nyang's dirty words made the faces of the monks turn purple. Feikong was so angry that the blue veins on his neck were bulging. He said angrily, "What did you say? Who played with my sister?" As soon as Mei Nyang opened the door, she sat on the ground and began to make a scene. Her hair was disheveled as she shouted, "Come on, the monks are playing hooligans." Shantang was a famous tourist attraction in Dongwu City. On weekdays, it was crowded with people. Even in the alley where people lived, there were many people coming and going. Chinese people liked to watch lively scenes. As Mei Nyang made a scene, it immediately attracted a lot of people, and the hall was immediately blocked. Mei Nyang didn't even blush. Instead, with a face full of snot and tears, She tearfully complained about how No Flower had prostituted women without paying, and how he had abducted her popular young sister. She was originally a woman with money and power, and her eloquence was so good that she could bring the dead back to life. Moreover, the things she said were all true. The time, place, names, and people were all clearly stated by her pretty mouth, and no one could help but believe her. The onlookers next to them could only sigh when they heard this, and their eyes immediately became meaningful when they looked at Purin and the others. Purin's realm was profound, so he could still hold on, but the monks around him were so red in the face that they wanted to find a hole to hide in. Feikong was so angry that he wanted to kill this woman with one slap. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, Purin sighed and said to Mein Yang, "Lady Tanyu, if you have any news about Lu Yi, you might as well tell me again. We will come again." When Mein Yang heard this, she immediately burst into tears and said, "Everyone look! While my man is not at home, she came to bully a weak girl. These monks don't recite scriptures properly, they only know how to bully women." Purin did not have the slightest temper, but at this time, his face could not help but turn a little black. He shook his head and whispered, "What a sin, what a sin!" Mein Yang did not intend to let him go. She cried loudly and said, "Yes, I don't know where my man has gone. You should go to find him. Why are you looking for a weak girl like me? Am I being wronged or not? Did I commit a sin or not? What a great sin!" Purin did not know whether to laugh or cry. Even though he was good at debating, he did not dare to say another word at this time. This was really a case of a scholar meeting a soldier. He didn't dare to stay any longer. He took a few monks and scurried away. After seeing them leave, Mein Yang got up and patted the dust off her body as if nothing had happened. A frivolous man next to her saw that she was beautiful, so he came forward and said with a smile, "Hey, how much is it for one night? Let's have some fun together." Mein Yang immediately scolded, "Go f***ck yourself." The crowd suddenly burst into laughter. Mein Yang glanced at the red-faced man with a sneer and walked into the door with her head held high. But as soon as she closed the door, she suddenly sat down with her back against the door. Her body almost curled up into a ball, and tears kept flowing down her face. She whispered in a low voice, "My enemy, are you alive or dead? Do you know that I'm waiting for you here?" At this time, some cultivators from other sects, who were hiding in the dark to inquire about the news, saw that Mein Yang was so shrewd and that even Master Purin had to leave with a face full of dirt. They were so shocked that they didn't dare to go to the sect again and ask for trouble. For a moment, many cultivators from other sects who were ready to go up to the door stopped and quietly retreated. After an unknown period of time, the golden crow gradually fell and the ewe-rabbit ascended. The originally bustling Shantang town returned to tranquility. The streets and halls were devoid of people. Only then did a fox figure appear in a dark alley corner. The fox's entire body was green and it only had one tail. Its body was almost completely hidden in the shadows, revealing only a pair of deep and painful eyes. It stared at the house where Mein Yang lived in a daze, its eyes full of deep affection. It looked at it quietly for a long time before it finally turned around slowly. Its footsteps were heavy and sluggish as it stepped into the shadows, never to look back again. It knew that it was better not to see each other than to see each other. I'll work hard on the chapter 10, but I don't think I'll be able to finish it tonight. Don't wait, everyone. Let's read it tomorrow. I'll definitely make up for this chapter. Book. Chapter 886. Li Yundong had found nothing in Dongwu City, and he still hadn't found any information about Lu Ye's whereabouts. As for Chao Yi and Lu Yuehong, there was no news of them, and he didn't know where they were. He had to put down this matter for a while and concentrate on dealing with the mystical silver fox hiding in the purple-gold luo pan. Calmly Yundong was now carrying the purple-gold luo pan with him, which was really like carrying a time bomb, making people very uneasy. After leaving Dongwu City, Li Yundong took Su Chan, Zi Yuan, Zhou Qin, Ruan Hongling, and Lin Miao to Mount Koya, Wakayama Prefecture, Japan. Because of Li Yundong and the others, except for Zhou Qin and Lin Miao, who had documents to enter and leave the country at any time, no one else had passports or documents, especially Su Chan, who was an unregistered resident. If she was checked on the street temporarily, she would be taken away. Therefore, Li Yundong and the others had to take Lin Miao, who couldn't fly, and Ruan Hongling, who couldn't fly for a long distance, to Mount Koya slowly. When they arrived at the foot of Mount Koya, they landed and walked all the way up the mountain. Although it was early in the morning, the foot of Mount Koya was still covered with snow. Many devout believers walked up the stairs and headed up the mountain. Although they had suffered heavy losses in a fierce battle, Zhenyan Tantrism had a strong foundation after all. At this time, they could still see 7 monks with high cultivation in a row. Some were holding Vajra Zen staffs, some were holding Vajra pestles, and some were holding wooden fish or alms bowls. They were wearing bamboo hats and extremely thin clothes, chanting sutras all the way. When the tourists at the side saw this, they all made way and bowed respectfully. However, these monks kept their heads down and walked straight away, as if the world around them was empty and the things around them were not disturbed. This caused many tourists to click their tongues and sigh. However, Li Yundong knew that at this time, Zhenyan Tantrism had suffered heavy losses. They were on high alert, so they had sent a very strong lineup to patrol and guard. These monks seemed to be ordinary, but in fact, the leading monk was a young monk in a purple Taoist robe. His cultivation realm was equal to that of a master at the Jinshin level. Although the monks behind him were wearing yellow Taoist robes, the lowest level was that of the young monk, who was only 1 level lower than the young monk. These 7 monks seemed to be in a row, but in fact, their steps were mysterious. The distance between each person's position was exquisite, and the magical weapons in their hands were even more powerful. Although it was absolutely impossible to deal with a top master like the mystical silver fox, it was enough to deal with the possible conflicts and sneak attacks from the various sects in the cultivation world in Japan. As the saying goes, laymen watch the fun, while insiders watch the Tao. When ordinary people saw these monks, they could only see their neat and solemn faces and solemn appearances, but they couldn't see the mystery behind them. In Li Yundong's eyes, he was thoughtful and felt something. At Li Yundong's realm, even if he saw leaves falling and flowers blooming, he could also understand the truth of heaven and earth. Zhang Sanfeng watched cranes dancing and turtles moving, so he realized the truth of cultivation and founded the Wudong sect. Hua Tuo saw animals walking, so he created the 5 animals play. This was the saying, mortals breathe shallowly in their throats, while sages breathe deeply in their feet. It was a common thing, but when it came to Li Yundong, it became unusual. Although Li Yundong had not studied the magic circle, with his current cultivation realm, as long as he saw any magic circle in the world, there was no mystery in his eyes. The mystery was in front of him, and it was like a butcher dismembering an ox. Li Yundong smiled slightly and sighed softly to Zi Yuan beside him. Zhenyan Tantrism is worthy of being the 2nd largest sect of Buddhism in Japan. After the Battle of Susanoo, there is still such a strong peripheral force. The foundation of this sect is amazing. Zi Yuan also nodded slightly and sighed softly. If our Chinese cultivation world suffers such a blow, I'm afraid that it will take more than 10 or 20 years for us to recover. We may even be unable to recover. Looking back, the Zhenyan Tantrism of Mount Koya will immediately have new blood. Although there are still no top masters, they have a large number of middle-level and high-level cultivators. As long as these people are still there, the foundation of this sect will not be shaken. Zi Yuan was cautious and paid attention to the words she spoke, but at this time, she also used a large number to describe the middle-level and high-level cultivators of Zhenyan Tantrism. It could be seen that she was really shocked by the deep foundation of Zhenyan Tantrism. In the Battle of Susanoo, Zhenyan Tantrism sent 100 or 200 people, but only 20 or 30 people came back, and almost all of them were injured. Such a heavy casualty rate was simply shocking. If it had been another sect, it would have definitely collapsed immediately. Even the Zhangyi school would have fallen apart after suffering such a blow. However, after taking a few breaths, Zhenyan Tantrism immediately recovered. This kind of strong confidence really shocked the Chinese cultivators. The 2 of them were talking in a low voice, but the young monk in purple robes, who was not far away, suddenly became vigilant. There were many sects in the Japanese cultivation world, and there were many sects under one pope. The intrigue between each sect and the conflict between the sects was very fierce. These days, they had been patrolling the mountain day and night in order to guard against other sects' evil intentions. Therefore, every step they took was in a state of high vigilance. Even if there were wanderers talking to them on the side of the road, they would absolutely ignore them, so as not to be distracted and be attacked by others. On the way to the mountain, when they saw anyone suspicious, they would also walk towards this person. Although they did not necessarily have to go forward to investigate, It was inevitable to observe and test them closely. These people were all cultivators who had been urgently transferred back to the main mountain from the periphery of Zhenyan Tantrism. Firstly, they had not participated in the public battle between Masako Tachibana and Li Yundong in Mount Koya, and secondly, they had not participated in the Battle of Mount Heavenly King. Therefore, they had no idea who Li Yundong was. The young monk, who was the leader, looked at Li Yundong up and down. He saw that although Li Yundong was handsome and had an extraordinary bearing, he could not see any Dharma power or Xueqi from his appearance. However, the women around him were more frightening. Especially the three most beautiful women. The aura they exuded was even stronger than that of the young monk. The young monk was shocked in his heart. He cast a sharp gaze from the bamboo hat that was pressed down low and looked straight at Li Yundong. This gaze contained the Dharma power, Xueqi, and the pressure of Buddhism. Ordinary cultivators would not be able to withstand this gaze immediately, and their blood and qi would be greatly disturbed. However, when Li Yundong was stared at by this gaze, it was as if the wind was blowing on his face. He didn't feel it, but there was a faint smile at the corner of his mouth. The young monk was shocked. He couldn't help but raise his head to look at Li Yundong. There was a burst of fear in his heart for no reason. He had never met such an opponent. The young monk said something to the monk behind him in a low voice. Without saying anything, the monk turned around and ran up the mountain. The young monk himself stepped forward, politely but vigilantly formed a palm with one hand. He saluted and said, "This Tanyu, where did you come from?" He spoke in Japanese. Li Yundong smiled and said, "From China." The young monk was stunned and said in half-baked Chinese, "Are you from China?" He looked at Li Yundong in bewilderment and asked tentatively, "May I know your name?" Li Yundong smiled and said, "I'm Li Yundong." The young monk's body suddenly shook, and his eyes widened. He couldn't help but take a step back, as if he couldn't believe his eyes. He cried out involuntarily, "Are you the reincarnated Wisdom King, Lord Battler?" His shout immediately attracted many tourists around them to look at them curiously. Although many of them were local believers, their understanding of the cultivation world was very shallow. How could they know what the two words reincarnated Wisdom King and Lord Battler meant? At this time, the name Li Yundong was really well known in the Japanese cultivation world. There was nothing more resounding than this name. The monks behind the young monk were even more shocked and felt a strong sense of disbelief. They couldn't believe that they had seen the reincarnated Wisdom King who had sealed the mystical silver fox. Li Yundong smiled faintly and said, "I don't dare to be called Lord Battler, but I seem to be the Li Yundong you're talking about. Why? Do you want to test whether I'm real or not?" Although the young monk had not participated in the Battle of Xueqi, he had heard of it, especially the 1,000-year grudge between the immovable Wisdom King and the mystical silver fox, as well as the story of the three immortals fighting against the celestial fox. It had really spread in the Japanese cultivation world in the past 2 days, and everyone knew it. The Japanese loved romance. The romance of deification and the romance of the three kingdoms of China were both masterpieces that the Japanese could not put down. The various romances about the warring states period in their own country were even more popular. The fierce battle between the Chinese and Japanese cultivation worlds against the mystical silver fox was fierce. Although the battle was fierce and the Japanese cultivation world was severely damaged, many cultivators who came to watch the fun went back and told the story of the battle in Xueqi like a romance story. The story in it was talked about with great relish. As the saying goes, a person's name is like the shadow of a tree. The young monk saw that Li Yundong's cultivation was unfathomable, and the women next to him were all extraordinary, especially the three most beautiful ones among them. Although their temperaments were different, they were indeed as beautiful as immortals. They were in line with the three temperaments of the legendary fairy immortal, human immortal and fox immortal. He had to believe it. At this time, the young monk took another step back and bowed respectfully. "I didn't know it was Wisdom King. I'm really impolite." A monk behind him stepped forward and whispered a few words to him. The young monk's face immediately changed, and he blurted out in his familiar Japanese, "Hurry up, go and catch up with him. Go and tell the great monk that Li Yundong, the reincarnated Wisdom King, is here." The monk immediately ran up the mountain path. The young monk was looking at his figure, and his heart was filled with anxiety. "Just now, I was afraid that Li Yundong and the others were experts sent by other sects to take advantage of the situation, so I sent a monk up the mountain to inform them, hoping to intercept this news. Otherwise, when all the experts on the mountain come out in full force, shouting to kill Li Yundong, and angering the Akalanatha, that would really be the end of me. Early in the morning, a strange reader came online and said to me, Tang Chuan, why are you still alive? I, who was writing, suddenly lost the mood to write. I was really speechless. There were all kinds of birds in the big forest. Well, these days, I have been disturbed a lot, and I have been hesitating whether to block the messages from strangers. Now it seems that the answer is really obvious. There are some people that you really can't afford to offend, and you really can't afford to hurt them. Student, you helped me make a decision. Thank you. Chapter 887. When the monk who had reported the news ran up the mountain quickly, the monk who had gone up the mountain before had already rushed into the Sangarama Taoist Hall, out of breath. The Sangarama Taoist Hall was the oldest Taoist hall in Mount Koya. Master Hongfa had built this Taoist hall when he opened the mountain. It was also known as the Altar Sangarama. This Taoist hall was divided into the Golden Hall Lecture Hall, the Fundamental Tower, the West Tower, and the East Tower. At this time, the monk rushed into the immovable lecture hall in the Sangarama Taoist Hall. At this time, the great monk was giving a lecture in the Taoist Hall, surrounded by monks in Kasaya. Although the battle had just ended, the daily cultivation was an indispensable course for the monks of Zhenyan Tantrism. Gu Shiguang was telling everyone in the Taoist Hall about the great mystery of the immovable Wisdom King's Mahamudra. The Japanese were good at learning. If they found that someone was stronger than them and defeated them, they would immediately learn from them in the most humble manner. After Li Yundong defeated Masako Tachibana, it attracted the attention of the Japanese cultivation world. But at this time, they did not feel shocked. They only felt that it was natural for Masako Tachibana to lose when she met the reincarnated Wisdom King. How could a fake win against a real one? However, when Li Yundong fought with the mystical silver fox and finally sealed the mystical silver fox, the Japanese cultivation world could not help but be shocked. They could not imagine that there was someone in the world who could fight with the mystical silver fox alone. The horror of the mystical silver fox had been recorded in countless books in Japan. The fox demon Yu Zhaoqian was even more well known in Japan. Therefore, the fierce battle between Li Yundong and the mystical silver fox brought unimaginable shock to the Japanese cultivators. This fierce battle touched the nerves of the Japanese cultivators. They finally realized that they were complacent and arrogant. On the first day when Gu Shiguang of Zhenyan Tantrism returned to Mount Koya with his monks, he announced that from today on, the research and study of the reincarnated Wisdom King would be officially put on the cultivation curriculum of Zhenyan Tantrism, and it would be the #1 important topic. Today was Kaisei Hikari's first lecture for the reincarnated Wisdom King, Li Yundong. He was demonstrating the magic of the mantra Mahamudra with both hands when he saw a monk rushing in from outside the door. Without saying anything, he almost rushed in. The social class in country A was extremely strict, especially in the cultivation sections. It was extremely bad to break into the Taoist field without greeting. Although Kaisei Hikari was shrewd, he couldn't help but pull a long face at this time and scolded, "Wukong, have you lost your soul? Look at you! What a scandal! What kind of person are you?" The monk pointed outside and said anxiously, "Great monk Zhang, there are powerful enemies at the foot of the mountain." The crowd burst into an uproar and stood up one after another. "What? A very strong enemy? Which sect are you from? Bastard, where did this fellow come from, wanting to profit from a burning house? Do you think that our Zhenyan Tantrism is useless?" After all, Kaisei Hikariuni had been through a lot. His face was as calm as water as he shouted, "What are you arguing about? Don't make a racket in front of Buddha." Everyone immediately became solemn. They lowered their heads and said, "Great monk Zhang is right. We were frivolous." After Kaisei Hikariuni scolded the crowd, he turned to the monk named Wukong and asked, "Who are they? What appearance? How old are they? How many people are there? Did they report their names?" Wukong said quickly, "It's a young man with 5 very beautiful women. He didn't report his name." Young monk Zhang of Shilong tested the man and felt that he was no match for him, so he asked me to report to great monk Zhang immediately. Kaisei Hikariuni was stunned when he heard this. He even brought 5 women? Are these 5 women also cultivators? Or are they just ordinary women? Wukong said, "They are all cultivators. One of them is a foreigner. It seems that his cultivation is not low. In addition, there are 3 women with amazing cultivation. I'm afraid that even young monk Zhang of Shilong is no match for them. There was another uproar. Although young monk Zhang of Shilong was a cultivator from the periphery of Zhenyan Tantrism, he was also a famous master in Zhenyan Tantrism. His cultivation was no less than that of Saionji Tsunakatsu. However, he had been entrusted with an important task by Kaisai Hikariuni. He was sent to Kyoto to serve as the principal of Koya Mountain University of Zhenyan Tantrism, and to assist the nearby temples and sects in running special schools in Kyoto and Dongji High School. Japan believed in Buddhism, and the deep influence of religion on the daily lives of ordinary people was far beyond what China could imagine. People jokingly said that they had been admitted to Harvard, but in fact, they were referring to the Buddhist Academy of Bing City. It was just a joke, and few people took the initiative to apply for these Buddhist and Taoist schools. However, in Japan, there were tens of millions of believers of Zhenyan Tantrism, and the number of believers of other Buddhist sects was also at least tens of millions. Such a large group of believers naturally gave birth to a huge interest group. Many devout believers of Zhenyan Tantrism sent their children to the primary school, middle school, high school, and even university established by Mount Koya. After graduation, they could be sent to the temple to become monks. The monks of Zhenyan Tantrism were well treated. It could be said that entering the temple was like entering a public institution in China. It was equivalent to holding an iron rice bowl for the rest of their lives. Therefore, many people yearned for the job of monks. The monks of Zhenyan Tantrism were divided into 16 classes. Among them, there were teachers, lawyers, junior monks, middle monks, senior monks, and senior monks. They all needed to have the corresponding educational background to be able to hold the post. For monks at the level of junior monks, promotion was not only based on their educational background, but also on their spiritual power cultivation, as well as their research and understanding of Buddhism. Kyoto was an extremely important first-tier city in Japan. In this city, the forces of the 3 giants of Japanese Buddhism, the Tiantai sect, the Zhenyan Tantrism, and the Pure Land sect, were intertwined. It was not uncommon for the 3 to fight for believers with each other. This kind of competition could not be carried out in the open, but was mostly reflected in the competition for students and students. Therefore, in this complex and sensitive place, it was absolutely impossible to hold the position of the principal of Zhenyan Tantrism University without great cultivation and great wisdom. Zhenyan Tantrism had always attached great importance to the territory of Jingdo. Even when facing the mystical silver fox, they did not move their men stationed in Jingdo. Only after suffering a heavy blow and the emptiness of Zhenyan Tantrism was threatened did they have no choice but to urgently call back Shilong, the principal of Mount Koya, who was in charge of Jingdo. The young monk of Shilong was quite old, but because he was born in a poor family, unlike Kaisai Hikari and the others who were born in the upper class, his promotion was quite slow. He had been a young monk for most of his life. However, although his position could not be promoted, the prestige of the young monk of Shilong was quite high in Mount Koya. He had been the principal of Mount Koya University for many years. Many monks in the lecture hall were his students. It could be said that there were many disciples and peaches all over the world. In the eyes of many monks here, although the young monk of Shilong was not of a high rank, his resume was amazing and his magic power was profound. He was second only to the great monk of Kaisai Hikari. When they heard Monk Wukong say that the young monk of Shilong was not as good as a few female cultivators, they were so shocked that they shouted loudly again. "This is impossible! How many women in the world can be stronger than the young monk of Shilong? How could they all appear at the foot of the mountain? Is it the sect of Shintoism?" The witches and goddesses of the Shintoism were all very powerful cultivators, but in the Japanese Shintoism, there were only a handful of beautiful witches and goddesses with profound magic power. The monks discussed and guessed. Could it be that the other sects of Shintoism have joined forces to attack us? Kaisai Hikari saw that they were getting more and more outrageous, so he frowned and shouted, "Quiet, all of you!" As he said that, he stood up and said in a dignified manner, "Wukong, lead the way. Let me meet this strong enemy." At this time, the monks in the lecture hall also stood up and said loudly, "Great monk, please let us follow in your footsteps." As he said that, everyone got up and went down the mountain with a murderous aura. These people were all monks of high seniority in the Kongabuji temple of Mount Koya. When they moved together, they immediately attracted the attention of many monks. They asked around and were immediately shocked. "What? A strong enemy had come to the foot of the mountain? How could this be? Let's go together. For a moment, everyone went down the mountain. The monk in the lead was wearing a red cassock. Behind him were some monks in purple cassock, but most of them were monks in yellow cassock. At this time, from a distance, it seemed that there was a yellow torrent on the mountain road, rolling down the stone steps with great momentum. However, when this group of people walked halfway up the mountain, they saw a monk walking up quickly and bumping into the great monk, Kaisai Hikari. When the monk saw this, he immediately waved his hands vigorously and said with a pale face, "Great monk, you can't do this, you can't do this." Kaisai Hikari's face darkened. "Why not? Make it clear." The monk swallowed his saliva and looked at the crowd with fear on his face. He said, "The person at the foot of the mountain is the reincarnated Wisdom King, Li Yundong." When everyone heard this, they were all shocked. What? The reincarnated Wisdom King is here? Is he here to be our enemy? Many monks had participated in the battle in which Li Yundong defeated Masako Tachibana. They knew that he had some friction with Zhenyan Tantrism. At this time, there was a sudden change. They thought of the worst and couldn't help but say with a sad face, "Is the reincarnated Wisdom King going to destroy his own Taoist field with his own hands?" When Kaisai Hikari heard this, he turned his head and scolded, "Nonsense." He turned his head and said in a deep voice, "Did the reincarnated Wisdom King say what he came for?" Although his voice was still calm, his hands hidden in the wide monk robe were trembling slightly. If Li Yundong really came with hostility, then the foundation of Zhenyan Tantrism for more than 1,000 years would be destroyed. Fortunately, the monk shook his head quickly and said, "The reincarnated Wisdom King doesn't seem to be hostile. He's having a good conversation with the young monk Shilong." When everyone heard this, they suddenly seemed to come back to their senses and felt lucky. Kaisai Hikari's tense face couldn't help relaxing. He asked, "Oh? Is he here to visit the mountain?" The monk hesitated for a moment and said, "It seems so." Only then did Kaisai Hikari feel relieved. He immediately turned around and said to the monks behind him, "Go and open the gate of Kongabuji Temple. I want all 3 gates to be opened. Ring the bell and play music to welcome the reincarnated Wisdom King." When these monks heard this, they were shocked. Some of them blurted out, "Great Monk Zhang, this is the etiquette to welcome His Majesty the Mikado." Kaisai Hikari said seriously, "If we don't do this, we can't show the attitude of our Zhenyan Tantrism. Go." At this time, a monk turned around and left. After a while, Li Yundong, who was waiting at the foot of the mountain, heard the sound of a big bell ringing in unison on Mount Koya, followed by the sound of drums, bowls, and other magical instruments playing music. The gate of Kongabuji Temple of Mount Koya creaked open, and a group of monks walked down the stone steps on the mountainside. It was Kaisai Hikari, the great monk in red robes. Chapter 888. Kaisai Hikariuni led the monks of Zhenyan Tantrism down the mountain. After arriving at the foot of the mountain, Kaisai Hikariuni walked out of the crowd alone. He made a palm with one hand, bowed, and said the name of Buddha, Amitabha, the great monk of Zhenyan Tantrism of Mount Koya. Kaisai Hikariuni has led the monks to greet His Highness the immovable Wisdom King. His words were spoken in Japanese, not Chinese. Although his words were polite, his etiquette was the etiquette of the sects meeting each other, not that of a subordinate meeting a superior. Soon. After all, Zhenyan Tantrism was the second largest force in Japanese Buddhism. It was a huge cultivation sect with a history of nearly 1,200 years. If they were too polite, it would be really troublesome if they were attacked in the future. But even so, it still shocked many tourists nearby. Some Japanese tourists looked at Li Yundong in shock and widened their eyes. They couldn't believe their eyes. This handsome man is actually the reincarnation of Wisdom King? In the Shinto temples of Japan, the reincarnation of Wisdom King looked extremely ferocious. In the hearts of the Japanese, the reincarnation of the immovable Wisdom King must be 8 feet tall, with a waist circumference of 8 feet. Moreover, his eyes were like copper bells, and he had a big mouth that could eat a little child in one bite. That was the real immovable Wisdom King. But the man in front of him was not only handsome, but also elegant and modest, which made people feel happy at first sight. How could he be as fierce as the legend said? At this time, there were at least 800 or 900 monks from Zhenyan Tantrism coming out to greet him, and most of them had high cultivation quotients. With so many monks looking at one place, the pressure could be imagined. But at this time, Li Yundong had a gentle smile on the corner of his mouth. Although he was received with extremely heavy etiquette, he was calm and his face did not change. He had the bearing of a great master. Some of the monks who had never seen Li Yundong in person could not help but admire him when they saw his dignified bearing. They sighed in a low voice and said, "He is indeed the wisdom king who can't be moved by the wind. He deserves his reputation. He deserves it." Li Yundong saw that Kaisai Hikaryuni was talking to him with etiquette. After hearing Zi Yuan's translation, he also said in Chinese, "Your Excellency is too polite. This time, I actually came here to discuss something with Your Excellency and the eminent monks of Zhenyan Tantrism." Kaisai Hikaryuni was proficient in Chinese. The reason why he spoke in Japanese was because of foreign etiquette. As a great monk of Zhenyan Tantrism, he naturally couldn't speak the language of other countries in public. This was very embarrassing. After hearing this, his heart moved. After quickly glancing at Li Yundong and the others, he smiled slightly and said, "There is a saying in China, it's a pleasure to have friends coming from afar. Your Highness, Wisdom King, has come from afar. We should go out to welcome you, but I don't know why Your Highness Wisdom King has come this time." Li Yundong tilted his head slightly to listen to Zi Yuan's translation and said, "Great Monk Zhang, shall we talk here?" Kaisai Hikaryuni smiled and said, "It's my fault. Your Highness, Wisdom King, please come in." As he said this, he turned sideways and motioned for Li Yundong to go ahead. Li Yundong saw that the other party was very polite, so he was also very polite. He was not willing to take the lead. After exchanging some pleasantries with Kaisai Hikaryuni, he insisted on walking side by side with him. Kaisai Hikaryuni was a little surprised. He didn't expect that Li Yundong would come with the power of defeating the mystical silver fox. He was so modest, without any arrogance. He was not as aggressive as he had been when he visited Mount Koya before. When he was secretly impressed, he couldn't help sighing to himself, "Why is there no such person in our Japanese cultivation world?" After a group of people surrounded Li Yundong and the others up the mountain, Kaisai Hikaryuni took Li Yundong and the others to the motionless lecture hall. After they sat down according to their seats, Kaisai Hikaryuni said in a fluent Chinese language, "Your Highness, may I ask who these people are?" As he said this, he looked at Wan Hongling and Lin Miao. Zhenyan Tantrism had a huge and sophisticated intelligence department. Of course, he knew who these two people were, but he said this in order to find a smooth topic to start a dialogue between the two sides. Hearing this, Li Yundong introduced Wan Hongling and Lin Miao with a smile. After the two of them exchanged some pleasantries, Li Yundong went straight to the point and took out the purple gold luo pan. He placed it in front of him and said, "Great monk, do you recognize this powerful magical weapon?" When Kaisai Hikaryuni saw it, his face suddenly changed. He blurted out, "Isn't this the powerful magical weapon that seals the mystical silver fox?" He looked at Li Yundong in surprise and couldn't help asking, "Your Highness, why did you bring this powerful magical weapon to our Mount Koya?" Kaisai Hikaryuni stared at the powerful magical weapon, raised his head, and asked, "Your Highness, do you want to seal this powerful magical weapon in our Mount Koya?" Li Yundong smiled slightly and asked, "Your Highness, if I have this intention, is your sect willing to bear this responsibility?" These words made the monks in the hall look at each other. They were not stupid. How could they be willing to take on this hot potato when the Zhenyan Tantrism was suffering heavy losses? Kaisai Hikaryuni immediately smiled bitterly. He knew that he had been defeated by Li Yundong, and he secretly regretted that he didn't dare to ask this question. But after all, he was shrewd and ruthless. He asked in return, "If I say yes, Zhenren Li, are you willing to put such a precious powerful magical weapon in Kongabuji Temple for safekeeping?" Li Yundong laughed and said, "As long as your sect is willing to agree, I will. I'll be there soon." Kaisai Hikaryuni also laughed and said, "As long as your Highness is willing to, then our Kongabuji Temple will welcome you. There's nothing to refuse." Wan Hongling, who was standing to one side, heard their conversation and was secretly anxious. She secretly transmitted her voice to Zi Yuan and said angrily, "Shiji Zi Yuan, why did Li Yundong send our things here and there?" However, Zi Yuan transmitted her voice in a low voice and shouted, "If you don't understand, don't talk." Li Yundong is testing him. Think about it. If you were the great monk and Li Yundong came up and said that he wanted to get the Wisdom King's Dharmakaya in your Mount Koya, what would you do? Ruan Hongling was just straightforward, but she was not stupid. After being pointed out, her eyes suddenly lit up and she suddenly understood. She transmitted her voice and said, "Ah, I understand. If I were the great monk, I would either find this Wisdom King's Dharmakaya and swallow it to strengthen my sect, or I would be a rare commodity and ask for an exorbitant price from Li Yundong." Although there were warmth and coldness in the world, the relationship between interests had always been ruthless. Even Du Fei and the others of the Chuanjin sect, who had always been on good terms with Li Yundong, did not dare to say a word for Li Yundong on some sensitive occasions as long as the interests of the sect were involved. He was afraid of getting into trouble and violating the interests of the sect. Du Fei and the others were like this, let alone the Zhenyan Tantrism, which had some conflicts with Li Yundong. What's more, this was a big cultivation sect in Japan. Li Yundong was well aware of this, so he took a big detour. First, he threw out something that Kaisai Hikari could not accept, and then he slowly bargained with him to avoid being extorted by the other party's righteous words. After all, this was their home ground. If these Japanese monks were determined to shed all pretenses and refuse to give him the Wisdom King's Dharmakaya, then even if Li Yundong killed all the people in Mount Koya, it would be useless. In the end, there was no other way but to stare at them. The two of them, one old and one young, were both lying through their teeth. Kaisai Hikari and Li Yundong looked at each other and smiled hypocritically for a while. They both cursed each other in their hearts, because they both knew that Li Yundong could not put this powerful magical weapon here. Kaisai Hikari had been to Mount Longhu and seen this powerful magical weapon. He knew that this powerful magical weapon did not belong to Li Yundong. Li Yundong also knew that the Zhenyan Tantrism had suffered heavy losses in the fierce battle, so he would not dare to keep this hot potato. Otherwise, if other sects had evil intentions and made a righteous name, he shouted, "We will go to Mount Koya and destroy the purple gold luo disc hidden in the Zhenyan Tantrism, so that the mystical silver fox will have no power to reverse the situation and will never have any future troubles for the future generations." This sentence seemed dignified, but in fact, it was shameless and vicious to the extreme. It was fake to kill the mystical silver fox, and the real thing was to destroy the Zhenyan Tantrism. It was just like the Chinese cultivation sects besieging the Fox Zen school. It was fake to enforce justice on behalf of heaven and kill the demons. It was real to divide the magic treasures and wealth of the Fox Zen school. If someone shouted out with ulterior motives, 80% of the cultivation sects in Japan would respond and then flock to Mount Koya. Most of them didn't dare to face the difficulties, but who wouldn't be willing to step on a drowning dog? Although the Zhenyan Tantrism was powerful, if it lost its righteousness and was attacked by the Japanese cultivation sects, the destruction of the sect would only be a matter of day. Therefore, after killing Kaisai Hikari, he didn't dare to leave the purple gold luo disc, which seemed to be infinitely beautiful magic treasure, in Mount Koya, because it was equivalent to courting death. Seeing Kaisai Hikari's words, Li Yundong simply pushed the purple gold luo disc to Kaisai Hikari and said, "Your Excellency, since the Zhenyan Tantrism has such a responsibility, I will leave this purple gold luo disc in your sect. Please keep it strictly and make sure that the mystical silver fox can escape from it." The corner of Kaisai Hikari's eyes twitched when he heard this. He had said it beautifully, but now the other party was stepping on his face. How could he dare to take it? Kaisai Hikariuni forced a smile and said, "Your Highness the Wisdom King is really flattering and honored. However, this old monk is in fear and trepidation that your sect doesn't dare to take in such an important and precious magic treasure alone. Otherwise, if it spoils your Highness, the Wisdom King, it will be a waste of your Highness' trust and good intentions." His words were also dignified and his posture was extremely low, as if he was saying, "Boss, don't play with me. How dare I accept it? Aren't you harming me?" Seeing that Kaisai Hikari was begging for mercy in a roundabout way, Li Yundong didn't intend to let him go. He said with a smile, "What are you talking about? Your sect has a deep foundation and great power. I've experienced it before. I'm relieved to leave this magic treasure with you." Kaisai Hikari was so angry that his face turned purple. He almost scolded Japan. "You bastard, you're really endless. What on earth are you doing here? Are you here to burn incense or to tear down the temple? Just give me a number." Kaisai Hikari just shook his head and refused to agree. His attitude was getting lower and lower. At this time, the smart people on the scene had seen the clues, and their expressions were strange. Zhou Qin and Lin Miao were from an official family, and the other was from a business family. They could see through these tricks at a glance. Both of them remained calm and watched Li Yundong and Kaisai Hikari exchange blows. This kind of exchange was not as fierce and dangerous as fighting, but it also tested a person's level of appearance and wisdom. They saw that Li Yundong had made a great monk like Kaisai Hikari look embarrassed with just a few words, and they couldn't help but admire him in their hearts. But for the monks on Kaisai Hikari's side, they didn't admire him at all. At this moment, some of the monks looked at Li Yundong angrily and thought, "This reincarnated wisdom king looks so young. How can he be so cunning? No, he's cunning. Too cunning, too hateful. Finally. I made it up. I'm going to sleep." Chapter 889. As the saying goes, a rogue can do magic, and an immortal can't stop him. Soon. When the reincarnated Wisdom King started to act like a hooligan, even the great emperor of Yu Huang would have to retreat in defeat. There was nothing he could do about it. Li Yunyong's face was righteous and his words were dignified, but his actual actions were shameless. He grasped the key of Zhenyan Tantrism and refused to let go. Kaisai Hikari was so angry that one Buddha ascended to the heavens, 2 Buddhas left his body, but he couldn't lose his temper. It was just like how the United States coerced the Japanese into signing an alliance in the Plaza Agreement, causing the Japanese economy to regress for 10 years. However, the Japanese did not dare to openly scold the Americans, because the national security of this country was covered by the United States. If they were disobedient, they would suffer even more. Zhenyan Tantrism was now in such a situation. As the saying goes, the situation is stronger than the person. Even if the person in front of him had a feud with him, he could only grit his teeth and bear it with a smile on his face. Kaisai Hikari and Li Yundong had a tug-of-war back and forth. Originally, he had hoped that Li Yundong's prestige was like the sun in the sky at this time, so he could be afraid of his status as Wisdom King and restrain himself. However, he didn't expect that the reincarnated Wisdom King would act shamelessly, which was really surprising. However, he didn't know that Li Yundong used to be half a rogue. He spoke with a cheeky face, but after cultivation, his bearing gradually calmed down, and he had the demeanor of a great master. However, at this time, when it came to such a sensitive matter, Li Yundong was just playing his true colors again. Kaisai Hikari's eyebrows were drooping. Seeing that Li Yundong refused to let go, he was extremely depressed, but he still pretended to be happy and said, "His Highness Wisdom King thinks so highly of our Zhenyan Tantrism. How dare we not obey? However, I don't know why His Highness Wisdom King values our Mount Koya so much." Kaisai Hikari's words were polite, but in fact he wanted to say, F***CKU. There are so many cultivation sects in Japan, and it's not like our Zhenyan Tantrism is the only one. In addition to Mount Koya, there are also Mount Hai and Wish Temple. By the way, Mount Wisdom and Mount Hengshan of the New Meaning sect are famous Taoist sites. Why did you come to Mount Koya? A dead monk can't kill a poor monk. Your Highness Wisdom King, can you King go and harm others? Li Yundong naturally understood the subtext. He smiled slightly and said seriously, Your Excellency, you are too polite. Mount Koya Hikari is one of the largest Taoist sites in Japan, and it is the main mountain of Zhenyan Tantrism. Almost all the famous eminent monks in Japan for thousands of years came from Mount Hai, but almost all the eminent monks and celebrities in Japan were buried in Mount Koya. I think there is no better place in the world to seal this magic treasure than here. Mount. At this time, Kaisai Hikari's face suddenly became very interesting. He didn't know whether to cry or laugh. What Li Yundong said was the proudest point of Zhenyan Tantrism, but now it had become their fatal weakness. Kaisai Hikari really burst into tears in his heart and swallowed his blood. He couldn't say anything. He couldn't hold Li Yundong's hand and beg bitterly, Your Highness Wisdom King, what do you value about us? Can't we change it? Of course he couldn't say that. Otherwise, he wouldn't be a monk anymore. At this point, Kaisai Hikari couldn't hold on any longer. He had to raise the white flag and say, His Highness Wisdom King's high hopes and favor really make Mount Koya feel honored. But after the battle with the mystical silver fox, our Zhenyan Tantrism has suffered heavy losses. I'm afraid we can't fulfill His Highness Wisdom King's great trust. At this point, Zhenyan Tantrism was completely terrified. A man could say anything, but he could never say that he couldn't do it. The same was true for the cultivation sections. If he admitted in public that he couldn't do it, who would join this sect in the future? When Kaisai Hikariuni said this, the monks in the motionless lecture hall were all dejected and dejected. This was simply lying down and being beaten. The little brother has already admitted defeat. Big brother, do as you see fit. Li Yunyang didn't care about his identity and face at all. He stepped forward and pushed Kaisai Hikari into a dead end. He was waiting for Kaisai Hikari to say this. Seeing that the other party had raised the white flag, he didn't want to let him go. He said, "Your Excellency is too modest. Zhenyan Tantrism is a famous sect in Japan. The last time I came to Zhenyan Tantrism to participate in the fighting, I was deeply impressed by the strength of your sect. I really can't think of anyone else who can take on this heavy responsibility except your sect." Kaisai Hikari really wanted to spit a mouthful of blood on Li Yunyang's face. His old face twitched a little. No one knew whether he was laughing or crying. Even Zhou Qin, who had some conflicts with Zhenyan Tantrism before, couldn't help but sympathize with him. But she also knew that if Li Yunyang politely came to them and said, "I'm sorry, everyone. My Wisdom King's Dharmakaya is with you. I want to take it. Can I?" The consequences could be imagined. The people of Zhenyan Tantrism were not idiots. Would they transfer the Wisdom King's Dharmakaya for nothing? If Li Yunyang didn't bully them at this time and force them into a corner, they would force him into a corner in the future. Kaisai Hikari lowered his body deeply, and once again lowered his posture. He said in an extremely painful tone, "Your Highness, I don't deserve your praise. I don't understand. What ability does our Mount Koya have to protect this powerful magical weapon? If the mystical silver fox breaks out, what should we do? Your Highness Wisdom King, you may not know this, but the mystical silver fox has always been guarded by the Tiantai sect and the Tiyuman family." "Ah, that is the Abe family. Why don't you find?" Kaisai Hikari was indeed a scheming person. At this time, he still wanted to bring trouble to others. On the side, the young monk of Shilong and the others saw that Kaisai Hikari had been bullied by Li Yundong for several rounds, and at this time, he finally played a trick. They secretly applauded in their hearts, and couldn't help but smile in admiration. However, Li Yunyang said with a pained face, "If they really have the ability to guard the mystical silver fox, there won't be these tragedies in the future. In my opinion, the Tiantai sect and the Abe family are not as reliable as the Zhenyan Tantrism. After all, this is the Taoist field of the immovable Wisdom King." Before the smiles on the faces of these monks could finish blooming, they immediately froze and looked at each other. Kaisai Hikari's eyebrows twitched. He saw Li Yunyang's regretful and pained expression. It really seemed to come from the bottom of his heart. His acting was so sincere that even an Oscar winner would die of inferiority if he saw it. Kaisai Hikari's heart was in pain. He wished he could take the wooden fish and knock it on his head. "If you bully me again, I'll die in front of you." He had lived for most of his life, and this was the first time he had been so miserable in front of everyone. It was really. How could he bear it? At this moment, Kaisai Hikari heard a crisp voice coming from outside the immovable lecture hall. It was a girl who couldn't help asking, "Why can the immovable Wisdom King's Taoist field protect the mystical silver fox?" When everyone heard the voice, they turned their heads and saw a beautiful girl in a kimono. She was blinking her big eyes and looking at the field. It was Tachibana Wakako. When Kaisai Hikari heard her words, it was as if he had heard the sound of nature. He seemed to have grasped something in his heart and quickly asked, "Yes, Your Highness the Wise King, why is that?" Li Yunyang had put Kaisai Hikari in a dead end back and forth just to make him ask such a question. However, he didn't expect that he had tried so hard several times. The old man was a little confused at this critical moment. It was Tachibana Wakako's childish words that revealed the secret of heaven. Li Yundong turned his head to look at Tachibana Wakako with a smile and nodded to her. After quarreling with her mother, Tachibana Wakako slipped out of the Ao Yuan. Along the way, she was bored and had nowhere to go. Naturally, she wandered around and went to the Kongabuji temple. However, she saw that there were almost no monks in the temple. Everyone was gathered in the immovable lecture hall, so she went over curiously. Tachibana Wakako had a high status in the Zhenyan Tantrism. As soon as she approached, The monks immediately made way for her, so that she could enter the lecture hall without any obstacles. She was simple-minded. After listening to the conversation between Li Yunyang and Kaisai Hikariuni, she didn't understand the subtext at all. She only felt that the great monk was very strange. Why didn't he ask about it? However, Tachibana Wakako misunderstood Kaisai Hikari. In his position, as soon as he heard that Li Yundong wanted to store the purple gold luo disc in Mount Koya, even if he had a tiger's courage, he would be scared to death. If this matter led to the destruction of the Zhenyan Tantrism, who could bear the responsibility? As a result, Kaisai Hikari did not want to ask about this matter. He was afraid that if he asked, he would ask about something else and cause a stir. He wanted to reject this matter first, but seeing that it was useless to say anything, he could only bite the bullet and ask this question. After Li Yundong smiled at Tachibana Wakako, he turned around and said to Kaisai Hikari, "Your Excellency, you should know that the immovable Wisdom King and the mystical Silver Fox are mortal enemies. If there is anyone in the world who can compete with the mystical Silver Fox, it must be the immovable Wisdom King. Is that right?" Kaisai Hikari didn't expect that Li Yundong, the reincarnated Wisdom King, would set up a trap for him shamelessly. After a few moves, he was already a little confused. He nodded subconsciously and said, "As His Highness the Wisdom King said." Li Yundong didn't wait for him to continue. He clapped his hands and said, "That's right. Mount Koya is the Taoist field of the immovable Wisdom King. Only here can the mystical Silver Fox be suppressed." Kaisai Hikari thought for a while in a daze and asked in fear and trepidation, "I haven't asked His Highness the Wisdom King yet. This Mount Koya is the Taoist field of the immovable Wisdom King. What does it have to do with whether it can suppress the mystical Silver Fox? After all, this is just a Taoist field, and there is no real Wisdom King. If there is a real Wisdom King, it is you, Your Highness." Kaisai Hikari's words were full of flattery. Others felt numb when they heard it, but Kaisai Hikari, an eminent monk, was pestered by Li Yundong to the point that he couldn't get out of the stage. At this time, he didn't care about his face at all. Li Yundong said with an evil smile, "Of course it's related. Since this is the Taoist field of the immovable Wisdom King, there must be the Dharmakaya of the Wisdom King. Since there is the Dharmakaya of the Wisdom King, it will definitely be able to suppress the mystical Silver Fox." If it had been someone else who said this, Kaisai Hikari would have spat on the other party's face. "Bah, you can suppress it just because you say so? Who are you?" However, it was the reincarnated Wisdom King himself who said this. In this matter, there was no one in the world more authoritative than Li Yundong. Kaisai Hikari asked doubtfully, "Is the Dharmakaya of the Wisdom King in Mount Koya? Why didn't I know that?" Li Yundong formed a palm with one hand, bowed, and said with a smile, "Amitba, the great sound is silent, and the great way is invisible. If the Dharmakaya can appear in an ordinary way, it is not a real Dharmakaya." As he said this, he pretended to push the purple gold luo pan in front of Kaisai Hikari, as if he was about to leave. "Your Excellency, please don't refuse any more." Kaisai Hikari was shocked. He quickly grabbed Li Yundong's sleeve and said, "Your Highness, where is the Dharmakaya? Please tell me. If there is really a Dharmakaya, please take it away personally. In the future, with the power of the Dharmakaya, wouldn't it be better to suppress and guard this powerful magical weapon day and night?" Li Yundong had long been laughing in his stomach, but he looked embarrassed. He turned half of his body and said hesitantly, "I'm afraid that's not good, is it?" Kaisai Hikari hurriedly said, Okay, the Dharmakaya of the Wisdom King belongs to the Wisdom King. As the saying goes, things belong to their owners. This is the mercy of Buddha, and everyone is happy. What's wrong with it?" Li Yundong pretended to hesitate for a while, then sighed and said, "Well, if I don't go to hell, who will?" At this time, when the monks in the motionless lecture hall saw that Li Yundong had finally agreed not to leave the powerful magical weapon in Mount Koya, they immediately breathed a sigh of relief, as if they had survived a great disaster. Su Chan, Zi Yuan, and the others next to him all held back their laughter when they saw this. Lin Miao was even more stunned and said in a low voice, "Oh my God, fortunately, Master didn't go to business. Otherwise, all the businessmen in the world wouldn't be able to live." Li Yundong's behavior was like selling someone and asking them to count the money for him. He was more cunning than a businessman and more shameless than a scoundrel. Guan Hongling, who was watching from the side, snickered and said to Ziyuan in a low voice, "Shiji Ziyuan, what's the saying? If a rogue knows magic, even an immortal can't stop him." At this time, Zhou Qin couldn't help laughing in a low voice. "What about Wisdom King?" Guan Hongling giggled and said, "The immortal has fallen to the ground. I'll take a leave and go to my father-in-law's house tomorrow. I have to get up early and rest early. It's almost midnight. Don't wait. I wish you a happy National Day. Eat and drink well." Haha. You're tuning in to the Xueqi's Martial Arts Saga YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.